Hello and welcome back to my channel. Make sure you like and subscribe to my channel. Let's begin. Chapter 9. Magnolia, Natsu's home. Does the word lullaby mean anything to you? Ichigo inquired, hoping that perhaps the Dragon Slayer would be able to shed some light. I think it's one of those things you sing to a kid to get him to sleep, right? Natsu replied. From his hammock on the opposite side of the room, Ichigo resisted the urge to slap the palm of his hand over his face. Perhaps he should have clarified, and that was his mistake, but even so it was still surprising that the pink-haired teen gave that particular answer. Besides the obvious answer. Ichigo clarified. Anything that isn't obvious is not in Natsu's department. Happy commented, eliciting a chuckle from the substitute but clearly annoying his closest friend. Whose side are you on anyway? Natsu exclaimed. Whoever gives me more fish, and since Ichigo owes me 2, I'm on his side. Happy proclaimed. That may have sounded rather greedy, but the Dragon Slayer perfectly understood the desire to have food. In fact, in some cases food took priority over everything else, and fish to Happy was the same as meat to Natsu. So he supposed it was a fair response. Oh yeah, I almost forgot about that, we can stop at the market or something tomorrow. Ichigo stated. Fish, 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 fish. Happy chanted, causing the orange-haired teen to sweat drop. Yeah. I'm gonna go to sleep now. Good night you too. Ichigo said. Night Ichigo. Natsu replied. Fish. Happy exclaimed, causing both Ichigo and Natsu to chuckle. Magnolia, streets leading up to Fairy Tale, the next morning. Both Ichigo and Natsu currently walked towards the guild hall with 2 very different expressions plastered on their faces. Natsu was his usual self, as was his closest friend who currently sat atop his left shoulder. Ichigo, on the other hand, looked extremely tired for some reason or another. It had been bad enough that he had promised to leave for the guild early the previous night, which was in hindsight a stupid decision, but he had also not slept well whatsoever. However, one positive about getting up as early as Natsu had requested, or rather demanded given that yet again the pink-haired mage had woken him up this morning, was the fact that he had a chance to stop by a store and pick up some different clothes. Thus, Ichigo currently wore a collared short-sleeved black shirt with long white pants that mirrored clothing similar to that of his world. Sadly, new clothing didn't really alleviate the substitute of his tiredness, which was very unfortunate given that he wanted nothing more than to feel awake. He released a tired yawn, stifling it with his free left hand but consequently drawing the attention of his Dragon Slayer companion. You alright? You look pretty tired. Natsu commented with a touch of concern making its way into his voice. Happy said, nodding his head in agreement. I'm fine. I just didn't sleep very well last night. At some point I'm pretty sure I fell out of the hammock and ended up on the floor for the rest of the night, so that's probably why. Ichigo replied, yawning yet again. How would you know if you fell out and ended up on the floor? Natsu asked. The orange-haired teen turned to look at his friend with a deadpan expression, not entirely understanding why the question was being asked. In fact, Natsu should have actually known the answer given that he was there when they both woke up earlier that very morning. Because I woke up on the floor, which you saw this morning. Ichigo replied, though he didn't think he needed to. Oh, so that's why you were on the floor this morning. Natsu said as if a realization dawned on him. He just said that, Natsu. Happy stated. I knew that already. Natsu barked. It's not a big deal. I'll be fine in about half an hour, I just need some time to wake myself up. Ichigo replied. The Dragon Slayer nodded in response, but he chose not to continue the conversation given that they were just about to come up to the entrance of the guild hall. When they were directly in front of the door, he brought back his foot as if to illustrate his intent, but stopped upon hearing the distinct sound of someone clearing their throat. What? Natsu asked confusedly, looking back at the proclaimed substitute Soul Reaper and noticing the slight glare he was directing at him. You're seriously going to just go and kick down the door, again? Ichigo questioned tiredly. I guess not anymore. Natsu grumbled, placing his foot back on the ground. A moment later the Dragon Slayer, although begrudgingly, did open the door in a normal manner, allowing Happy to be the first to enter the guild before he and Ichigo then walked inside in unison. See, it isn't as fun this way. Natsu stated matter-of-factly. I don't really see a difference. Ichigo replied. Hey guys. Lucy greeted, waving at the trio from the side of the bar across the room. Hey Lucy, what's up? Ichigo replied, though he sounded less enthused than he traditionally did. Good morning, I wanna say. Lucy. Natsu said warily as he and the remainder of his technical team walked up towards the main bar. Wow, you actually got it right this time. Lucy said, sounding surprised. Mentally she actually found it hard to believe that she could ever be impressed or surprised that someone got her name right. It was very easy to remember, after all. Nevertheless she greeted her two friends, and to a lesser degree a certain annoying cat, with a bright smile. You look tired. Lucy commented confusedly, starting at Ichigo as he sat down at the bar. I kind of fell out of my hammock and slept on the floor at some point during the night. Ichigo replied, obviously unhappy that he didn't notice this was the case until after waking up. Oh, sorry to hear that. Anyway, what are the both of you planning to do today? Lucy asked with a raised brow. Well, I wanted to go on another job, so you up for it, Lucy? Natsu offered cheerfully. I don't know, is it because you actually want to go on a job or because I happen to have blonde hair? Lucy questioned, scowling at the recollection of why the Dragon Slayer wanted to team up with her in the first place. Ah, come on, don't be like that. We made a good team. Natsu countered. And we're running out of food money, so we need to do a job and quick. Happy exclaimed. I told you this morning I was fine with buying food since you're letting me stay at your place. Ichigo groaned, rubbing his eyes in a light attempt to shake off his tiredness. It, incidentally, did not work. Nah, we can't ask you to do that unless we really end up needing it. Besides, it'll be good to go on a job, just the four of us, right? Natsu countered. Well, I can't forget that rent will be due next week. Lucy reasoned. So is that a yes? Happy questioned. The blonde released a tired sigh as she looked back at the goofy grin the Dragon Slayer was giving her. She was still a bit upset about how he previously manipulated her and essentially just asked for her help due to the color of her hair, but all in all she supposed they did get the job done. Fine, I'm up for it. Lucy replied, still frowning slightly despite her answer. Great, we can go pick out a job while Ichigo, well, does whatever he can to stop being tired, I guess. Natsu mused. Lucy nodded in agreement before the two and their feline companion headed towards the request board, leaving the orange-haired teen to sit in silence with his eyes closed and his head resting in the palm of his hand. By the request board. Wow, I had no idea wizard jobs were so varied. Lucy thought aloud, glancing at each of the many different types of jobs they could take. Though she did keep in mind the fact that enough money was a prerequisite, this didn't change the fact that she was able to get a good look at all the jobs almost all at once. Some were DLVRY, some were protection detail, some were simply cleaning jobs, and the list went on and on. Yeah, but remember we need to pick one with enough money. You need to cover your rent, right? Natsu reasoned, though his words caused the blonde to release a tired sigh. You remember that, but it took you days to get my name right. Lucy wondered aloud. Why bring that up now? Natsu countered. They both shook it off a second later, after which they began to look up the various jobs once again. Natsu paid particular attention to one job that seemed like it would be perfect, having a sizable reward and also being one that multiple people would likely be needed for. However, before he could grab it he was rudely greeted by the one person he just adored seeing so much. Mornin', Flame Brain. Gray greeted as he walked up to the request board. strpr. Natsu responded in kind. So are you looking for a new job to mess up? Gray asked. The tick mark that appeared on the pink-haired teen's forehead was all the incentive the ice mage needed to anger him, and even he was helpless to stop the small smirk that came onto his own lips as a result. For your information, I am picking out a job for Ichigo, myself, and Lucy. I also found the perfect one. Natsu sneered. You mean the perfect one to mess up, right? Gray corrected. As a result of the ice make user's repeated comments, Natsu was just around 2 seconds away from starting one of his guild's famous rumbles in traditional fashion. However, in the corner of his eyes he could see that Ichigo appeared to be asleep over by the bar, or at the very least nearly asleep. With that in mind, the Dragon Slayer thought back to what had happened to him the previous morning and gained a mischievous smirk. Hee, yeah Gray, you're probably right. Anyway, since I found the job, could you go wake Ichigo up for me? He's just over by the bar and I need to tell Lucy about the job. Natsu requested. His words somewhat surprised the black-haired teen, mostly because Gray had thought that the Dragon Slayer's response would be some kind of remark about how he always seemed to lose his clothes, or at the very least an insult to his inelegance or magical abilities. The fact that he was so taken aback made him so out of it, in fact, that he actually considered complying with the request. Did your fire finally melt your brain? Gray chided. Heh, not at all. I just want you to go wake up Ichigo so we can get going, is all. Natsu replied. All right. Gray replied, sounding highly confused. But Natsu, Happy began, only to be silenced at the sight of Natsu's mischievous look. The blue-haired Exceed seemed to grasp the concept almost instantly thereafter. This is gonna be a riot. Natsu thought, smirking devilishly at the thought of what would undoubtedly happen next. The ice mage walked towards the main bar with his thoughts still in disarray. A part of him couldn't actually believe that the Fire Dragon Slayer had actually agreed to his attempted insult. It just didn't make any sense. However, he quickly shook loose of such thoughts upon coming up to the sleeping form of the orange-haired teen. Yo, Ichigo, Natsu wants to talk to you about a job or something like that. Gray stated. His words elicited no response from the sleeping form of Fairy Tail's latest member, but even so that was to be expected with how dead asleep he appeared. Sighing to himself, the ice mage brought his hand forward and prepared to ever so slightly tap his shoulder in order to wake him up. Ichigo, Natsu said he won. Gray began, only to stop mid-sentence in light of what happened next. Before another word left his mouth, Ichigo's eyes shot open, he grabbed Gray's arm, and subsequently threw him across the guild into one of the tables on the far side of the room. The wood of the table instantly shattered and Gray seemed to just groan slightly from within the wreckage. That turn of events definitely got the attention of the guild, however the only ones making any noise were Happy and Natsu, who were both laughing hysterically at what had just occurred. Crap. Ichigo muttered, knowing full well what he had just done. Even now the ice mage still hadn't gotten out of the collision-induced debris. Hello Ichigo, what happened? Mira exclaimed, having just walked out from the back room with several jugs in her hands. She placed them on the surface of the bar, after which she just stared strangely at the scene before her. Sorry about that Gray. Ichigo called out sheepishly. His words surprised Mira-Jane given that the orange-haired teen didn't really seem to be the type to just go and throw someone across the room, let alone someone like Gray. At this, however, Elfman began to chuckle from his table, finding the recent turn of events rather amusing. Now that's how a real man wakes up. Elfman exclaimed cheerfully. I repeat, what just happened? Mira asked confusedly, looking towards the proclaimed substitute Soul Reaper for an answer. It's nothing, just an accident, again, sorry. I'll pay for the table and everything, if that's a light. Ichigo offered solemnly. He did assume he had more than enough money at the moment. It's not really a big deal. Tables and furnishing break here all the time, so we have several spears in the basement. Mira replied cheerfully. This happens so much that they have spares. Ichigo wondered, sweat dropping slightly. Okay, still, sorry about the table. Ichigo apologized once more. The white-haired barmaid waved a single hand with her eyes closed and a smile etched on her face as if to say it wasn't necessarily a big deal. She did, however, need to go get a new table, and thus she entered the back room and made to get the replacement. Just as this was happening, however, a certain ice make user got up from the remnants of the table and made his way over to the bar. What's the big idea throwing me across the room? Gray exclaimed angrily, a tick mark appearing on his forehead and having a fist raised directly at the substitute's face. Yeah, again sorry about that. My dad had a habit of waking me up by attacking me, and while I guess that was useful for some purposes, the reflexes don't make it easy to wake me up. I did the same thing to Natsu accidentally the other day. Ichigo explained. The ice mage instantly noticed a specific part of the otherworldly teen sentence, and that was the portion that involved a certain pink-haired dragon slayer. However, it turned out that it wasn't directly Ichigo's fault, so he supposed it didn't matter. Alright. Gray trailed off. He then walked over to Natsu, a calm expression still present on his face for a short period of time. However, upon coming into close proximity of the destructive mage, a tick mark popped out of his head. What's the big idea, you flame-brained moron? Gray shouted, butting heads with the dragon slayer. You wanna fight me, Popsicle? Natsu countered. What kind of a stupid question is that? Gray exclaimed. The two then began to punch and kick after one another across the guild hall, which subsequently caused Ichigo to sigh due to the fact that he just knew this had something to do with him. From what he could gather, the black-haired mage was likely sent over to him by Natsu, since said dragon slayer knew perfectly well what would happen. Though I didn't think he could come up with something like that, oh well. Ichigo thought. On any normal day he would have stopped the two from punching the living daylights out of one another, but he did promise the pink-haired wizard that he'd let him fight Gray while he still had the chance. Plus he was still too tired to care. Oh, so now they're going at it again? Mira mused, walking back to the bar. Ichigo looked at the barmaid with a surprised expression, after which he looked back to the previously destroyed table only to see that the debris was cleared up and a fresh one took its place. How did you? Ichigo mumbled, looking back and forth between the table and the bubbly teenage woman in front of him. I did tell you this happens all the time. Mira stated, giggling amusedly at the orange-haired teen's expression. But still, that was pretty amazing. Ichigo said with a slight sense of awe, prompting the barmaid to blush, albeit barely, at his comment. It's not really all that impressive. Anyway, how are you today? You look a bit tired. Mira commented. The substitute made to answer, but no sooner than he opened his mouth did he release a tired yawn. He did cover it up with his hand as he traditionally did, but nevertheless the barmaid giggled in response. Yeah, I didn't sleep very well last night. Ichigo replied, smiling slightly at the sound of the white-haired woman's laughter. Oh. That's too bad. Any particular reason why? Mira asked, a touch of concern in her voice. I kinda fell out of the hammock and ended up on the floor at some point during the night, and I didn't really realize what happened until I woke up this morning. I don't understand how Natsu sleeps in those things. Ichigo replied, rubbing the back of his neck, given that even now it still felt stiff as a result of his sleeping habits. Well, if you ever need a comfy bed to sleep in, I could help you out. Mira offered with a warm smile. Her words immediately got the effect of causing Ichigo's eyes to shoot wide open and for his face to light up a brilliant shade of red. Mira Jane saw this a moment later, and it was only then that she grasped the implication of her words. I didn't mean it like that. Mira stated with a heavy blush on her face, waving her hands frantically. I was only saying that if you ever needed to shop for a mattress, I could help you out. Mira clarified, the pitch of her voice dying down a good bit. It's okay. Thanks for the offer. Ichigo said, his cheeks still red. This place is so weird. Lucy commented from the sidelines as she watched Natsu and Ichigo's respective interactions. Well, love can make anything bearable. A smooth-sounding voice called from behind her. The blonde turned with a surprised look on her face, only to see the man she knew as one of the most eligible bachelors in all of fairy tale. She, however, didn't have a very high opinion of him at the moment despite this being the case. "Why don't you join the team of love with me, Lucy?" Locke offered. What?" Lucy bashfully asked. "You're just so stunningly beautiful that I have to keep my sunglasses on or I'll be blinded by your dazzling beauty," Locke stated charmingly. "Girls really fall for this?" Lucy scoffed. An instant later the orange-haired mage caught a glimpse of the celestial spirit keys that were currently attached to the belt strap on the blonde's left hip. His skin almost instantly paled and sweat began to drop from his brow. "You're not a celestial wizard, are you?" Locke exclaimed as he backed away from what he had previously described as a beautiful girl. "Huh?" Lucy uttered confusedly. "Yup, she's got fish and crabs and stuff," Happy commented. "Cruel fate, why must you toy with me so?" Locke shouted in despair. "What the hell?" Ichigo wondered, seeing the overzealous reaction, alongside Mira, that occurred directly next to the main bar. "I'm sorry, but you and I can't be together, my dear," Locke stated as he ran off. "What got into him?" Lucy wondered aloud, sweat dropping at the previously smooth-talking mage's actions. "Locke has a bad history with celestial wizards. Rumor has it he dated one and it didn't end very well," Mira explained. "Anyway, did you and Natsu at least find a job before he started to fight with Gray?" Ichigo questioned, simply ignoring the ongoing fight between the two said wizards. "I think Natsu did, but he never really told me what it was," Lucy replied, releasing slight chuckle shortly. Thereafter. "Well, if you do go on a job, let me know. The master's away at conference so I'm covering for him," Mira stated. "I was wondering where the old man was. Anyway, what kind of conference is he at?" Ichigo questioned curiously. "It's a conference for guild masters. Every once in a while they come together so they can talk about the state of things. It's like the Magic Council, but not," Mira explained. "The Magic Council, what's that supposed to be?" Ichigo asked confusedly. "Oh, that's right, you really wouldn't know about them," Mira reasoned. Mira tapped her chin in thought as if considering something, after which she seemed to realize the perfect way to answer the orange-haired teen's question. Abruptly the barmaid turned towards a nearby table, glancing at a man with a large torso wearing a white shirt and an odd-looking hat. "Excuse me, read us, may I borrow a light pen?" Mira requested. "Oui." Read us replied. The white-haired former wizard began to draw a diagram in thin air with the object that could only be described as a magical pen. Once the diagram was complete, it was revealed to be something similar to a hierarchy of the magical organizations in the kingdom. With the drawing finished, she turned to face both Ichigo and Lucy once more. "The Council, Era, is the most powerful organization in the magical world. It has 10 members and it's their job to uphold all magical rules and regulations. And if a wizard breaks any magical laws they would be tried by the Council." Mira began. Ichigo picked up, specifically, on the portion in which the barmaid described the laws and regulations function of the Council. These people definitely seemed like the type he didn't want to PSS off during his stay, especially with his current situation given that it would only service to make matters all the more complicated. Then there's the different Guild Masters League, which are local groups that work together, then the individual masters, and it's their job to pass on the decrees of the Council. They also communicate with other guild masters on a regular basis. They are basically the glue that holds us all together. It's a pretty stressful job." Mira continued. "I never knew all the guilds were so interconnected," Lucy muttered. "The system really is intricate, but also well balanced. The only real problem is the dark guilds, which exist outside the system itself. They're the bad apples of the magical world and are mostly involved with magical crime," Mira added. "TCH, figured there'd be people like that. Ichigo scoffed. They sound kinda scary. Lucy commented. Happy said in agreement. What did you call me? Natsu exclaimed, breaking up the conversations across the guild and alerting everyone of his fight's escalation. You heard me, you spineless wimp. Gray shouted. Let's get serious. Natsu stated, summoning fire to cover his fists in the manner he preferred to do whenever he was fighting in hand-to-hand combat. There they go again. Mira commented, sounding amused but appearing as if she were nervous. The master wasn't here to stop them, after all. I guess I should stop them. Ichigo mused. The substitute had only just gotten out of his chair before the door opened up in what sounded like an urgent manner. Everyone turned quickly, seeing Locke once again, though if his expression was anything to go by it seemed the world was about to end. I've got bad news, it's Urza, she's on her way here. Locke stated. The entirety of the guild froze completely at the words of the man who appeared as if he were Ichigo's doppelganger. Even Natsu and Gray, or rather especially, stopped their fighting and paled. Wow, just mention her name and everyone freezes up. Lucy thought aloud. Well, she is the strongest female wizard we've got in fairy tale and more than a bit intimidating. Mira commented. I still don't see how she can possibly be this scary. Ichigo thought aloud. Previously he had suspected that Natsu and Gray were just being childish or possibly just over-exaggerating how strong or scary this female mage was. However, if the reaction of the guild was anything to go by, you'd think that she was as strong as Yamamoto and as charming as Grimmjow. But a moment later the audible sound of approaching footsteps filled the air, though no one said a thing given that they all know who the owner of the footsteps was. Shortly thereafter, the expected happened. A relatively tall woman with a slender figure, scarlet-colored hair, deep brown eyes, and a serious disposition entered through the open doors of the guild hall. She wore a silver set of Heart Crew's armor with the emblem of the guild tattooed in red directly over where her left BRST was presumably located. Beneath that she wore a simple blue skirt and a pair of black boots that covered her lower legs and reached to just below her kneecaps. The oddest thing about her, however, was the fact that across her shoulders she carried a large horn-like object decorated with jewels and gold, though for unknown reasons. I have returned, where is Master Makarov? Urza questioned sternly, placing the large object down on the floor and standing it upright. Wow, she's pretty. Lucy commented. Welcome back, Urza, the master's at a conference right now. Mira stated. I see. Urza replied with a nod of understanding. She isn't exactly what I pictured her to be. Hell, if I believed half of what Natsu said, she'd be about as good-looking as a hollow. Ichigo thought ironically. The mental image that Natsu had given him was a large monster capable of destroying mountains without any significant effort. To him, the mountain thing was believable given that he had personal experience with destroying them so easily in the past, but being a literal monster was going a bit too far. This woman seemed nowhere near as scary as she was made out to be, but that was in line with his suspicions. In fact, the only strange thing about her was the object she had carried in. So, what's that humongous thing you've got there? One of the guild members asked curiously. It's the horn of a monster that I defeated. The locals were so thankful that they decorated it and gave it to me as a gift. Do you have a problem with it? Urza asked aggressively. Not at all. The man immediately replied. She's not anything like I imagined. Lucy thought aloud. Now listen up. Urza commanded. Everyone in the guild practically stiffened at this, clearly out of fear. Ichigo, for his part, was starting to understand that this girl, while she didn't appear scary whatsoever, was more than capable of proving her strength. The members of the guild could act scared and childish all they wanted, but if they didn't respect her they wouldn't listen to her, plain and simple, which meant she had clearly done a good bit to earn it. That said, she's definitely a little rough around the edges. Ichigo thought, mentally noting that the red-headed teen was, or at least appeared to be, incredibly bossy. Still he could count off people more insufferable than this that he got along with, mainly Byakuya, Toshiro, Soifun, and he supposed Yamamoto, in a way. While I was on the road I heard a few things. Word is Fairy Tail is causing nothing but trouble as of late. Master Makarov doesn't seem to care, but I most certainly do. Kana, you need to control your drinking habits. Urza began, glancing at the brown-haired mag who currently sat at one of the tables with a barrel of alcohol in hand. The scarlet-haired teen then began to give various commands to several of the guild's members, ranging on scolding them for smoking to scolding them for dancing indoors. She really is bossy. Ichigo thought as he listened to the commands. They weren't necessarily unreasonable, but even so it was hard to make an order seem unbossy. She's really tearing into everyone, it's like she's completely taking over. Lucy whispered to both Ichigo and Mira. That's Urza for ya. Happy stated. Even if she is pretty bossy, she still seems like the sanest person here. I don't get why people are so scared of her. Lucy stated. Ditto. Ichigo commented. Are Natsu and Gray here? Urza abruptly asked. When this was asked, Urza turned to face the iconic fire and ice magic users of Fairy Tail, as did Ichigo and the others who were intently listening to the woman's words due to the fact they didn't have any idea what she was like prior to her entrance. However, for a brief moment they dropped their curiosity about Urza in favor of confusion. Before their very eyes, Natsu and Gray stood, shaking in light fear, holding one another's hand in a friendly manner. It was incidentally so unnatural that Lucy almost shouted at the top of her lungs due to her own confusion. Natsu said. Oh hey there Urza, we're just hanging out like good friends tend to do. Gray said, clearly being nervous. Natsu added. Why is Natsu talking like happy? Lucy exclaimed worriedly. That's great, I am quite pleased to see the two of you getting along so well. However, it's only natural for even the best of friends to lock horns every now and then. Urza stated. I don't know if we're the best of friends. Gray trailed off. Natsu stated. This is really weird. Ichigo commented in a clearly confused tone, eliciting a giggle from the white-haired barmaid. Well, it's only natural, Natsu's terrified of Urza. A few years ago he challenged her to a fight and she beat him up pretty bad. Then she found Gray without any clothes on and decided to beat him up as well. Mira explained, sounding cheerful despite the oddity of her words. Actually I can understand that last one. Ichigo stated. In all honesty he was surprised the ice mage had gone so long without losing his clothing. It was probably the longest period of time the substitute had ever seen him with all of his clothes still on his body. She also beat up Loke for trying to hit on her. Mira added. And I can understand that. Lucy said. Natsu, Gray, I need you to do me a favor. Urza abruptly stated. The mood of the guild changed from a calm terrified to one of deadly seriousness at the words of the red-headed knight. It, very clearly, wasn't every day that she asked anyone for favors. While I was on my travels I heard something that has me troubled. Normally I would consult the master but he isn't here and this is a matter of utmost urgency. The two of you are the strongest wizards here and I could really use your help. Urza continued solemnly. Did that just happen? Someone whispered. Urza, if you need help with a mission I can suggest a few people. Mira Jane offered cheerfully, drawing the attention of the scarlet-haired woman. I could use all the extra help I can get. If you believe they are strong enough to aid me then I will not decline your offer. Urza replied with a small smile. Our two newest members will be more than strong enough to help you. Lucy defeated a mercenary gorilla using only her pinky finger, and Ichigo saved my life during my photo shoot by beating over 30 bandits with his bare hands and without using any magic. Mira stated. Lucy's sweat dropped at the words the barmaid had said, mainly because they weren't all that true. They weren't necessarily untrue, but still they made her sound a bit more impressive than in reality. Urza, however, just stared confusedly at the bubbly woman as if she didn't understand or found something beyond her ability to believe. "We have a strawberry in our guild that is capable of combat?" Urza asked in a surprised voice, though since the redhead was currently in the guild not a soul laughed out of fear of incurring her wrath. "That's not what it means, damn it!" Ichigo exclaimed, a tick mark coming onto his features. The scarlet-haired Requip user turned to face the source of the outburst with a confused expression, not recalling the particular voice at any previous instance. She just assumed that it belonged to a new member. "My apologies, but I don't recognize you. Are you new to Fairy Tail?" Urza inquired calmly. "Yup, he sure is, and so is she," Mira Jane stated, dragging Lucy into the red-headed knight's line of sight. "Oh. What are your names?" Urza asked with a raised brow. "Hello Mrs. Urza, ma'am, I'm Lucy Heartfilia, nice to meet you." Lucy greeted nervously, desperately wanting to make a good first impression. "And you are?" Urza asked, turning towards the orange-haired teen. Inwardly the blonde let loose a sigh of pure relief, taking the scarlet-haired woman's silence as a sign that she didn't mess up. She didn't get any words of praise, but not messing up was just as good at the moment. "My name's Ichigo Kurosaki. Also it doesn't mean strawberry, it means he who protects," Ichigo stated. "My misunderstanding, it will not happen again, I assure you," Urza said stiffly. "Right," Ichigo replied, sweat dropping at the robotic manner the woman was currently speaking. It was almost as bad as Ulquiorra, though not quite due to the fact that her tone was fine. Mainly, it was the words and serious demeanor that made her out to be mechanical. "Anyway, if you need the extra help you should take them. They both seem capable, and I got to see Ichigo fight firsthand. I'm sure they can help you out," Mira said confidently. "Mira said that you took down over 30 thugs with your bare hands and without the use of magic, is this true?" Urza questioned, genuinely wishing to know if this was the case. The one positive thing she had heard during his recent travels had been that a fairy tale wizard had foiled a human trafficking syndicate that desired to capture a series of sorcerers' weekly models, one of which was Mira. If this turned out to be the very person behind that praise, then perhaps he would prove to be useful on her coming mission. He also helped to save Mikau's sorry butt. Someone else commented, though said blue-haired mage stayed quiet given that he didn't want to anger Fairy Tail's Titania even more than he already had. "Yeah, it's true," Ichigo simply replied. "Then I need only to know one thing, can you hold your own on this mission?" Urza asked in an ominous but deadly serious tone. "Yes," Ichigo immediately answered. Truth be told, he didn't even need to know what he was up against. That never mattered to him in the past and it didn't matter to him now. Plus, if someone who was as strong as this Urza person was said to be, then it stood to reason that this wasn't exactly a go-at-your-own-pace job request, which would mean that his help was likely necessary. "Why yes, I think so," Lucy said, though she sounded nowhere near as confident as Ichigo did. "Very well, welcome aboard. We will meet at the train station tomorrow morning. Please be prompt," Urza said. "Well, guess I'm not going on a job with the others after all," Ichigo thought. Magnolia train station, the next day. The party of warriors gathered just outside the train as per the request of Urza. Currently happy, Ichigo, and Lucy sat on a bench that was directly opposite to the tracks. If one were to ask them, they were just acting as casual observers to the rather interesting spectacle that was unfolding directly in front of them, and said spectacle was none other than Natsu and Gray's patented version of dysfunctional teamwork. What was Urza thinking, inviting you when me and Ichigo are really the only help she'd need? Natsu scoffed, butting heads with his fellow guild mate and practical rival. "That's my line, and a weakling like you would just get in the way." Gray barked, glaring daggers at the dragon slayer. "Shouldn't you do something?" Lucy asked, turning to the orange-haired substitute for some kind of action to be taken. "I thought Mira was the one who asked you to keep them from fighting." Happy stated from his position on the bench he and the others outside of the bitter rivals currently sat. She did. Lucy trailed off, not entirely sure what else to say. Well then you aren't doing a very good job. Happy pointed out. Not true, I asked Ichigo to stop them. Lucy defended. No, I'm not going to bother. I'll only stop them if they start to actually fight. I don't really see a problem with them angrily glaring at each other and throwing a few insults. Ichigo replied. But there are other people around. Lucy stated. And for all they know we've never met them before in our lives. Ichigo replied. I guess that makes sense. Lucy mused before looking back at the two bickering mages. Sorry I'm late. I hope you weren't waiting too long. Urza stated. No, not at all. Lucy answered cheerfully. Everyone turned to face the scarlet-haired mage upon noticing her arrival, and upon doing so several things almost immediately happened. Happy, naturally, didn't do anything different. Natsu and Gray began to act as if they were the greatest friends in the entire universe for obvious reasons, and as for Lucy and Ichigo, they simply stared with wide eyes at the massive amount of luggage Fairy Tail's strongest female wizard had brought with her. DMN, that's a lot of luggage. Ichigo exclaimed, staring with wide eyes at the literal cart that seemed to be half as wide as the train they were supposed to board. Happy chirped. Are you all ready to depart? Urza questioned in a friendly manner. I'm good whenever everyone else is. Ichigo stated. Same here. Lucy and Gray said simultaneously. Hey Urza, I'll go with you, but only under one condition. Natsu stated, surprising several in the group. Shut up. Gray quietly exclaimed. Oh. Well then let's hear it. Urza said evenly. I want a rematch when we get back to Fairy Tail. Natsu stated, only adding to the shock of most everyone else. You got a death wish or something? Gray asked, light concern in his voice given that he knew perfectly well what their mutual friend and guild mate was capable of. I'm a lot stronger than I was last time, and this time's gonna be different 'cause I'm gonna beat you. Natsu proclaimed, grinning heavily at the prospect of fighting with one of Fairy Tail's strongest mages. And here I thought he was terrified of her. Ichigo thought, not exactly understanding the logic, if any existed, that the Dragon Slayer was using. Yes. I can tell you've improved. As to whether or not you can beat me, I suppose we'll have to see. I accept your challenge. Urza replied, smirking slightly. All right. Now I'm all fired up. Natsu exclaimed. Aboard the train, some time later. The train itself ran smoothly along the tracks as it was meant to. Within a specific section, each member of the group sat in silence, or in one particular instance quite a bit of pain. On the left side of the seats were Gray, Ichigo, and Natsu, while the lovely Fairy Tail ladies alongside Happy sat across from them. I really don't get how he can have it this bad. Ichigo thought before frowning slightly as he looked down at the motion-sick-stricken Natsu. The Dragon Slayer had been so energetic just moments before they boarded the train, and yet now it was very clear that he was anything but. Just a second after it had started moving, he was down for the count in a matter of speaking. I swear you're totally pathetic, Natsu. 1 minute you're picking a fight and the next you're like this. Gray stated as he looked out the window off to his side. Ichigo half expected a comeback from the pink-haired teen, but when it didn't come he only felt a bit more sympathy for his condition. If he had ever been in a similar situation with Yuryu in that he wouldn't be able to talk back, he'd probably have pulled his hair out by now. It's gotta be tough on him getting from place to place. Lucy reasoned. Don't worry, he'll be fine. Why don't you come over and sit with me? Urza offered. I guess she wants me to move over. Lucy thought, sweat dropping at the lack of request courtesy of Fairy Tail's queen. Natsu groaned. A moment later the fire dragon slayer moved across to the other side of the seating arrangements and placed himself to the immediate right of the scarlet-haired mage. An instant after that, said mage punched him in the gut and knocked him out cold. That should make the trip a little easier on him. Urza reasoned. You just knocked him out, you realize that, right? Ichigo trailed off confusedly, though the red-headed woman didn't seem to hear him. Maybe she isn't as sane as I thought she was. Lucy thought. Anyway, I think it's time you started filling us in. I mean, what kind of mission are we going on here? Gray questioned. Of course. Urza began, paying no mind that they were technically short one pair of ears. He's knocked out, how can she not realize that? Ichigo thought. The orange-haired teen had considered raising that point up again, but he actually wanted to know what was going on as well. Also, it wasn't as if he couldn't tell Natsu about the mission later, given that he would, eventually, wake up, or at least he hoped he would. I have reason to believe that the Dark Guild Eisenwald is planning something big. I'm not sure what exactly, but it has to do with a magical item called Lullaby. Urza continued, though her words instantly struck everyone else with a sense of realization. Wait, Lullaby? Ichigo asked, the name having disturbed him directly after he had heard it just 2 days ago. That thing from before? Lucy wondered aloud, looking to both Ichigo and Gray for clarification. You've heard of it before? Urza asked in a surprised tone. We ran into a group of wizards on our way back to Fairy Tail the other day. We were in the forest and they took Happy and tried to eat him. That didn't sit well with us, so we, well, really Ichigo was the one who fought them. Beat him pretty easily too, but when we tied them up they said something about Lullaby, and then that was it. Someone took them out of the picture as second altar. Gray explained. I see, so you've run into Eisenwald before. Urza mused. I'm not positive that they were a part of the guild, but they did mention Lullaby. Gray replied. The timing was too convenient. If they really were members of that dark guild, then someone from Eisenwald clearly didn't want them talking to us. Ichigo stated. It sounds as if they were members of the guild that dropped out and went into hiding. Perhaps they wanted no part in what was coming. Urza guessed. So this thing's so bad it even scares dark wizards. Gray reasoned. I am only hypothesizing. But whoever dragged off Happy's kidnappers the other day clearly didn't want their plans getting out. Urza stated. Still, we can't rule out that whatever is coming could be that bad. Ever since we've heard the name Lullaby I've just had a bad feeling. Ichigo said. I will explain starting at the beginning. I had stopped in Onaba at a local pub that was considered a gathering spot for local wizards. I overheard a conversation, and Urza began. In the following minutes the scarlet-haired woman explained word for word what the nearby table of wizards had said, and the ominous feeling that she had when she had been listening. The name of Lullaby and a seal had come up multiple times, and even in one instance the name of a very wanted criminal in the magical world. Wait, so they were trying to unseal it? Lucy reasoned. Yes, but the fact that it was sealed away means that it has to be extremely powerful magic. Urza replied. Wait, so are you positive that the guys you saw at the pub were actually with this dark guild we're going up against? Ichigo asked with a quirked brow, instantly dampening the mood of the red-headed mage. Yes. I can't believe I was such a fool that day. I recognized the name they said. Aragorn, the ace of Eisenwald. He only accepts assassination requests and that has earned him the title Aragorn the Reaper. Urza replied. He kills for money? Lucy asked fearfully. When the council outlawed assassination requests, Eisenwald decided that money was more important. They broke away and have been active ever since. Urza said. Okay, I should be heading back home now. Lucy said fearfully, tears streaming from her eyes. Lucy's slimy all of a sudden. Happy stated. It's sweat. Lucy growled. How could I have been so foolish? If I had recognized Aragorn's name sooner I could have done something. Now we're in this situation and it is all my faulty. Urza stated, slamming her armored fist directly into the side of Natsu's head. Easy, you do realize his head isn't made of titanium? As for the Eiswald Guild, if they really are as bad as you say, then we'll just have to take them down harder, right? Ichigo reasoned, smirking slightly. Yes, I suppose you are. Urza said, smiling slightly given that this was exactly what she felt they needed to do. Still, all we know is that something big is probably going down. Gray stated. But at the same time we need to stop them because we don't have a choice. These Eisenwald people don't seem like the type that would care about innocent lives, so whatever it is that they have planned we can't assume they've got the people's best interests at heart. Ichigo said. Exactly, which is why we must stop them before they can do any harm. Urza added. Anyway, if we're done with this topic, what kind of magic do you use, Urza? Lucy asked, curiosity currently winning out over her fear of the Dark Guild at the moment. That's a good question. Urza replied. Urza's magic is really pretty. She makes her enemies bleed, a lot. Happy said in an upbeat manner. I don't know if I'd call that pretty. Lucy replied. I don't know about that, personally I think Gray's magic is much more beautiful. Urza stated. What, like this? Gray asked. The black-haired teen extended his hands, one of his palms open and the other hand forming a fist atop the first. An instant later an icy mist surrounded his hands before he opened his fist shortly thereafter, revealing a perfectly formed ice copy of the Fairy Tale Guild mark. Oh wow! Lucy exclaimed. I use ice magic. Gray stated. Now I get why you and Natsu don't get along. He's fire and you're ice, not exactly the perfect mix. Lucy reasoned. I never thought about it like that. Urza said amusedly. Nah, I just hate his guts. Gray stated. I'm gonna get up for a second. Someone. Make sure Natsu wakes up soon, alright? Ichigo requested before getting up, likely heading towards a restroom or something along those lines. Shortly after the orange-haired teen was out of ear reach a food cart came by their booth, at which point several purchases were made. Urza, in typical fashion, purchased a slice of strawberry cheesecake while Lucy purchased a few sandwiches and Happy just chose to munch on a fish. So when did you and Ichigo join the guild, Lucy? Urza questioned, deciding to kill the short bit of time that remained until they reached their destination. We joined a few days ago, actually. Lucy answered. Oh, and what? Urza began, only to stop as a message sounded from the conductor. Attention all passengers, we have arrived at Onaba Station. Please exit calmly and efficiently. The conductor requested. Alright, let's get going. Urza stated, immediately getting up and heading towards the doors of the railway-oriented vehicle. Wait, don't we? Lucy began, only to stop given that everyone else had already left the booth, or so she thought. The group made their way to the exit, immediately before which they ran into Ichigo as he himself was making his way back to their booth. Oh, perfect timing, let's go. Urza stated. At this, the orange-haired teen raised a curious brow. He looked behind his guild mates to see if they were, indeed, short a member. Upon seeing that this was the case, he instantly brought up the subject, or at least he tried. But what about? Ichigo began, only to be cut off. If you have questions, please ask them when we exit the train. We haven't a moment to lose. Urza stated. But Ichigo said, only to stop upon the red-headed mage forcefully guiding him by extending her arms and very much so encouraging a speedy exit. Outside the train, a minute later. The group exited the train despite the fact that Ichigo desperately wanted to say something. When this had finally happened, Urza smiled contentedly and took in a deep breath of fresh air. Finally, now we can start on our mission. Urza stated happily. The scarlet-haired knight was now under the impression that they could immediately get to work and erase her previous error in judgment. However, she had overlooked something rather obvious. Wait, where's Natsu? Gray wondered aloud. The train's horn sounded off a second later upon its route resuming, which drew the glance of everyone in the group. In that instant they each realized, or rather everyone save for Ichigo realized, that they had made great error. Oh, there he goes. Happy muttered, waving goodbye towards the train as it zipped away. I was so busy talking I forgot about him. I am such a fool. Natsu hates all forms of transportation. Urza said, mentally berating herself for such an obvious error. This is what I was trying to say, damn it. I even told you before I left to wake him up. Ichigo exclaimed. You are correct and I am truly sorry. You may strike me down if you wish. Urza offered, bowing her head slightly towards the orange-haired teen. The red-headed mage closed her eyes a moment later, evidently bracing for the hit that she expected to come. However, Ichigo had absolutely no intention of doing so. In fact, if she didn't appear so serious he would have thought it was a complete joke. Yeah, I'm not gonna hit you. I do have to go get Natsu though. Lucy, could you? Ichigo began. Yup, I know the drill. Lucy answered with an amused giggle, eliciting a nod of understanding from the substitute. Urza's eyes widened slightly at this, mostly because she didn't understand two things. One, how the orange-haired man was going to catch up to a train, and two, what Lucy had to do with it. She assumed that, perhaps, his magic was speed-related, and even that would also explain how he continuously took down multiple foes with ease, but she was proven incorrect shortly after such thoughts passed through her head. Before Urza's very eyes, the brown-eyed teen grabbed a trinket that looked similar to a wooden skull, after which she thought, briefly, that she had double vision. One Ichigo appeared to split into two. However, the one that she had been familiar with fell back into the arms of the blonde celestial mage. The other version prepared to move out, black-clad in a shihakusho and a large cleaver-like sword strapped on its back covered with white cloth. What on earthland is this? Urza wondered curiously. The orange-haired teen began to make tremendous leaps forward, heading towards the train without any delay. His strides went beyond pure speed as it appeared he continuously accelerated by using his feet and timing his leaps so as to cover a great deal of ground with each stride. What was more interesting was that every time his feet would come into contact with the ground a force would be applied that was large enough to noticeably crack the rocks beneath his feet. What kind of magic is that? Urza exclaimed in a surprised fashion, having never seen anything like it. Ichigo doesn't use magic, he's not even from this world. Happy exclaimed. Are you mocking me, Happy? Urza questioned with a slight glare, a dark aura surrounding her as she stared down at the cat. Actually, no, he isn't. Gray stated, coming to the defense of his companion. Urza turned to look at her raven-haired comrade with an equally angered look, but upon seeing that he actually was being deadly serious she calmed herself and became quite confused. Explain yourself please. Urza requested. Well, you see, Ichigo is. Lucy began. Aboard the train, with Natsu. Gah. Blah. I hate my life. Natsu groaned from the floor of the train. He had tried desperately to make it out of the booth, but unfortunately he didn't have a follow-up plan. Fate just seemed to be a cruel mistress to the friendly dragon slayer at the moment. Well, what do we have here? An arrogant-sounding voice asked to seemingly no one in particular. Who's that? Natsu wondered confusedly. Although he didn't know who exactly this man was, he suddenly no longer required that information upon the man's foot coming into contact with his face. He was positive that at the very least this guy was no friend of his. You little fairies are nothing more than ants to us, blindly following the magic council like little insects. He sneered. In a fit of both rage and determination the dragon slayer pushed the man's foot off of his face, in essence creating a bit of space for himself and simultaneously getting a good look at the person who had so rudely insulted him and his guild. The man who stood across from him had spiky black hair wrapped in a band, black eyes, and a cocky disposition. He wore a pure white overcoat over top dark red t-shirt, teal-colored pants, and standard-looking black shoes. "Listen buddy, don't go talking smack about my guild unless you wanna get hurt," Natsu warned, his fists lighting up with fire as he spoke. An instant later the transport shifted slightly, and even that slight movement caused the Dragon Slayer to stumble and nearly lose the contents of his stomach. His threatening demeanor disappeared just as quickly as his flaming fists in the wake of his crippling motion sickness. "Hit a nerve did I?" the man questioned in an amused voice. "Shut up," Natsu barked. He, let me show you how it's done," the man sneered. Beneath his feet 3 shadowy tendrils made their way through the wooded floor and popped back up only when they were close enough to land a clean hit directly on the pink-haired Dragon Slayer. Natsu was helpless at the moment and as a result couldn't do anything but allow the attack to hit him, subsequently after which he landed on his side flat on the wooden floor of the train. "Not so tough now, are ya?" he scoffed, the shadow-manifested arms twirling around his being. In the next instant, before the Dark Wizard could mount another successfully attack, the train came to a complete stop, thereby causing him to fall flat on his face. Out of his pocket, a small wooden flute-like object with a skull dominantly showing on its end fell, landing on the floor halfway between the two. What the hell was that? The raven-haired man wondered aloud. Back at Onaba Station. "Ma'am, you can't just pull the emergency lever without permission," a station worker stated. "It's for our comrades, please understand," Urza replied. "Are you kidding me?" the man exclaimed. Back on the train. "What the heck is that thing?" Natsu wondered aloud, seeing the odd-looking flute that had flown out of the white-clad man's pocket. "DMN, he saw it," the man stated in an annoyed tone. He instantly ran over to the flute and grabbed it, quickly putting it back into his pocket before he opted to face the fairy tale wizard once again. It was very clear that he would have to eliminate him, otherwise this could very well get out of hand. Abruptly, however, the roof of the train was smashed into by an unknown arrival. The wood sporadically flying around the nearby area caused the black-haired man to bring up his forearm to protect his eyes, after which he got a glimpse of an orange-haired teen standing just below the fresh hole in the ceiling with his back facing him. "What's with that getup?" he wondered confusedly. "Hey, Natsu, are you alright? I sensed something weird here, so Ichigo began, only to stop upon seeing the Dragon Slayer point directly behind him. He turned to see the white-clad man and immediately after this he scowled heavily. The presence of this particular wizard was something he was familiar with, or at the very least he knew he had sensed it before. It was the very same as the one he felt the other day when those dark wizards were taken away before they could say anything more about Lullaby. "Just who the hell are you?" the man sneered. "Ichigo Kurosaki, who the hell are you?" Ichigo replied. "Name's Kageyama, and that's all you fairy tale flies are gettin' out of me," Kage stated matter-of-factly. "I've sensed you before, you were the one from..." Ichigo began. The train began to move once again, cutting off Ichigo's speech and also giving a certain Dragon Slayer a desperate need to leave the vehicle as soon as was physically possible. "We don't have time for this, Ichigo. We need to get out of here and meet up with Urza," Natsu stated. "Wait Natsu, Ichigo began, only to be cut off yet again by the form of a dim-witted action. Without any warning the Dragon Slayer grabbed Ichigo's arm and jumped out the closest window of the now-moving train. It appeared that he had actually been unconscious, otherwise he would have likely known or at least taken a hint that the black-haired wizard had been with Eisenwald. "Ay! Natsu yelled as he continued to fly through the air, the train zipping past them as they did so. "Wait, what the hell is that thing?" Ichigo wondered. Something very similar to a car was currently flying towards them at impressive speeds. He could tell that Urza was currently the driver, but despite this she didn't seem have any intent of stopping upon seeing them fly towards the vehicle. In fact, it was going so fast that it appeared it was going to collide with them in a few seconds. "Crap!" Ichigo exclaimed. When the car-like vehicle did, in fact, collide with him and Natsu, he had actually been the fortunate one. The Dragon Slayer had, in a fashion typical of him, collided with Gray on the roof of the odd-looking form of transportation. Ichigo, on the other hand, had been lucky enough to stabilize himself and grab onto the side of the car, thus preventing him from landing in any horrible manner. "Urza, stop the magic mobile!" Lucy exclaimed from within the vehicle, obviously knowing full well that Gray was no longer on the roof. The car came to an abrupt stop on its side a moment later, which caused Ichigo to fly forwards given that he didn't have a good grip on the magic mobile to begin with. Fortunately he only landed on his side, and he had dealt with a lot worse in terms of landings before. Natsu and Gray, on the other hand, had not been so lucky. Both appeared as if they saw stars if their dazed expressions were anything to go by. "Natsu, are you okay?" Ichigo called out, getting himself off of the ground and dusting himself off. Natsu groaned. "Some time later." "That hurt, you idiot!" Gray exclaimed once the group had gathered outside the magic mobile. "What the hell was I supposed to do?" "It's your fault for being on the roof in the first place," Natsu countered. Happy said in agreement. "In any case, I'm just glad you're alright," Urza stated. "Wait, you guys remembered to bring my body into that magic mobile thing, right?" Ichigo asked, knowing full well that this group in particular already had a trend of forgetting things. "Of course, we would never leave behind a comrade," Urza stated, though her words drew a deadpanned expression from both Natsu and Ichigo. "Right, anyway. What the hell were you thinking, Natsu?" Ichigo exclaimed, much to the surprise of everyone present. What?" Natsu stuttered. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Ichigo shouted, clearly annoyed at the pink-haired dragon slayer. "All I did was jump out a train, what's the big deal? Everyone's alright, and we have a job to do, so we couldn't afford to waste time," Natsu said defensively, though his answer caused a tick mark to appear on the substitute's forehead. "That guy back there on the train was the same one from the forest that got away," Ichigo stated in an annoyed tone. "What?" everyone else shouted in unison. "You mean the random guy that attacked me? But all he did was insult our guild, so I thought he was just picking a fight. But there was this weird flute thing with a skull on it that he dropped at one point," Natsu said, tapping his chin in thought. "Natsu, you just allowed one of our enemies to escape due to your own stupidity. Have you anything to say for yourself?" Urza said, clearly agitated. "Wait, who are we even fighting?" Natsu shouted confusedly. "Don't you ever listen? I swear you have the world's worst memory," Urza exclaimed, smacking the dragon slayer upside the head as she spoke. "It's your fault in the first place he didn't hear you, remember, you knocked him out," Ichigo shouted, not understanding how the scarlet-haired mage didn't realize that. Urza turned with a somewhat surprised expression that suggested she realized her mistake. Immediately thereafter she bowed her head to the orange-haired teen and shut her eyes before next she spoke. "I apologize for my insolence. You may strike me down for my penance," Urza said in a serious voice. "No, I'm not going to hit you, Urza. Why don't you just fill Natsu in on what's going on while I go get into my body, then we should probably go after that train. I could tell that guy was the same one from the forest, and if that's the case then he is probably in Eisenwald, or at the very least he knows about whatever they have planned," Ichigo suggested. "That seems as if it is the best course of action," Urza conceded, nodding in agreement. The scarlet-haired woman picked up on the fact that Ichigo implied he was going to re-enter his human body, which actually made her a bit more curious than she already had been. Previously, Lucy had explained the teen's situation among a few other things, and she had quite a few questions about him given that everything about the blonde's transfer of information was almost unbelievable. Flashback. "I see, and does the master believe he was speaking the truth?" Urza asked in a serious tone, keeping her confusion and surprise very well hidden for the moment. "Yeah, and to be honest I'm coming around myself," Even if it does sound idiotic, and even though Natsu believes it, I really am starting to think it's true. Gray stated, growling slightly at the mention of the Dragon Slayer's name. When we first met him he appeared directly out of the sky, and I've seen him do things that no magic I've seen is capable of. Lucy added. Urza hummed in thought for a moment, a serious look on her features. It was true that even she, in the short time she had known the orange-haired teen, had seen something that isn't any form of magic in existence. The ability to shed a body was in the way he seemed capable of was completely unreal, but also incredibly fascinating at the same time. Moreover, when he took on his black-clad form, she felt a certain aura emanating off of him. It was very clear that it was some form of energy, but at the same time she hadn't the slightest idea of what that energy was. In truth it was similar to magic energy, but at the same time it wasn't. I understand. For now we must try to stop that train in order to allow Ichigo to grab Natsu. Urza stated. You're taking all this really well. Lucy commented, noticing the calm demeanor of the female mage had yet to change. While I may not know a single thing about the Soul Society or what a substitute Soul Reaper is, I will not allow my curiosity or personal confusion get in the way of our current objectives. Any questions I have for him can wait until after the task at hand is complete. Urza answered. It was after this that she had caught sight of an emergency stop switch over on the far side of the room. In actuality it was incredibly devoid of guards and very clearly labeled. However, that did allow her an easy opportunity to stop the train. Thus, her conversation ended and she walked off. Current time. All right Natsu, pay attention this time. Urza began. On his way back to the car, Ichigo's eyebrow twitched at the words of Fairy Tail's strongest female wizard. Even now she still didn't seem to register that it had been her fault the Dragon Slayer didn't hear her the first time, which was all the more shocking because she had just asked to be hit in order for penance. She really is insane. Ichigo thought. Some time later. This ride is. Ichigo began. The magic mobile, with the next instant, swerved off to the side and jumped a good 3 feet off the ground, rattling those within it and causing Natsu to release an elongated groan given that his stomach was definitely not in the best of shapes. A little bumpy. Ichigo finished, hanging on to the railing as he spoke. At least you're not on the roof. Gray commented from atop the vehicle. How you holding up, Gray? Ichigo asked, looking up at the ceiling of the vehicle. He couldn't see the ice mage, but all the same it was the thought that counted. Just peachy. Gray replied sarcastically. What about you Nats? Ichigo began, only to stop upon actually looking down at the Dragon Slayer. Natsu was currently on the floor of the vehicle with his eyes practically rolled into the back of his head and his face turning a light shade of green. His current condition was actually worse now than it was on the train, but that was to be expected given that they were going even faster now than they had been on the railway-oriented vehicle. You alright Lucy? Ichigo asked, noticing the blonde's pensive look. It's just that the name Lullaby, and the look of the flute you guys told us about. I know it from somewhere. Lucy stated. Then you should tell us at once. If you have any helpful information at all then we will need it to be victorious. Urza stated as she drove the car. What she said. Gray added. I don't know exactly how it works, but I think I remember Lullaby, the cursed song. It's a type of death magic. Lucy explained, sounding worried. Wait, so that means that Aragorn. Ichigo began. Is planning to use it to kill innocent people. Urza exclaimed, cutting off her comrade. If it was at all possible, the vehicle began to move faster, likely. Reaching its maximum speed, or so it seemed. Natsu's face, with the increase in the vehicle's speed, predictably, turned even greener than it already had in the wake of their even quicker traveling speed. In hell. Natsu groaned out. The vehicle hit yet another bump and flew into the air once again for a brief period of time, bouncing a few times upon coming back into contact with the ground. This was, naturally, accompanied by another from Natsu, who really couldn't catch a break today. Slow down, Urza. You're using too much magic energy. Gray exclaimed worriedly from atop the roof. If I do end up wasting too much, then I will just have to rely on the rest of you to complete the mission. Urza replied. The words of both the Ice Mage and the red-headed knight caused something to click in Ichigo's head. If magic energy was somehow used in powering the vehicle, that would also mean that Urza was somehow filtering her power into the vehicle. And if that's the case, then I might be able to test something. Ichigo thought. In his mind, an opportunity presented itself to see just how similar magical energy was to spiritual energy. The worst-case scenario, in his mind, was that his spirit energy didn't power the vehicle and they come to a momentary stop, but even then he still got to confirm or disprove his own little theory. Lucy, make sure my body doesn't fall around too much. Ichigo requested. Huh? Lucy exclaimed. Before she could even ask a coherent question, Ichigo had already grabbed his combat pass and separated his two forms. Without another word of warning, he opened the door and climbed up onto the roof, leaving the blonde speechless and confused. What the hell? Gray wondered aloud upon seeing the orange-haired teen exit the vehicle. Sorry Gray, but you mind moving over? I wanted to ask Urza something. Ichigo stated. Alright. Gray replied. The Ice Mage was actually quite confused as to why Ichigo had donned his Soul Reaper form without a word of warning, only to randomly walk onto the roof of the magic mobile. However, he assumed that it was something of importance since he didn't really seem like the type to just do things like that. Of course, there was always the possibility that Natsu's stupidity had started to rub off of the orange-haired teen, but that was the more distant of the two possibilities. What is it that you wanted to ask of me? Urza questioned, glancing back as opposed to keeping her eyes on the road. I wanted to ask you how this thing works. You said something about magical energy, so do you filter it into the magic mobile somehow? Ichigo questioned. Yes, that is correct. I attach this pump onto my forearm and it drains my magical energy to power the vehicle. Urza answered evenly. At this the substitute began to hum in thought. The location of the pump seemed to be in line with his thoughts, given that he knew that it was located near the exact point where one of the spiritual outlets of Soul Reapers was located. He recalled such things from Urahara's encounter with Aizen, and the secret weapon that the shopkeeper had opted to use. I see, do you mind if I try powering it for a while? I want to test something that's been bugging me a bit. Ichigo requested. Very well, I would appreciate it if I was given a small break. I will continue to steer, however. Urza replied. An instant later Ichigo followed the redhead's instructions as to how he would remove the pump from her arm, and shortly thereafter he hooked it onto his own. During this time the pump itself had been shut down, though the car still moved due to the amount of magical energy Urza had previously been putting into it. Are you ready? Urza questioned, looking back towards the substitute for confirmation. Yeah, go for it. Ichigo replied. The scarlet-haired mage then turned the pump back on, believing that nothing abnormal would happen. At worst nothing would happen, and at that point they could just switch places once again, meaning who would use the pump to power the vehicle. However, something unexpected did, indeed, happen. Shortly after the pump was turned on, the car began to shoot off into the distance at speeds twice as fast as it had been previously moving. Urza could feel the force of the wind hitting her like a ton of bricks, while Ichigo and Gray were forced to hang on to the railings to avoid flying backwards and landing on some random spot of dirt, though only one of them had tears in his eye as a result of the sudden increase in speed. Within the car, however, only banging noises could be heard, likely due to the fact that its inhabitants were being thrown around like pinballs in a machine. Luckily there were not sounds of a certain dragon slayer vomiting, so that was a positive. What the hell? Gray exclaimed as the car continued to zoom off at unbelievable speeds. Eep. Lucy squealed from within the magic mobile. Urza shut the pump off. Ichigo exclaimed, obviously not wanting to continue the trend of making the vehicle a death trap. No. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. We're moving too quickly to pass up this opportunity. I will continue to steer, you just continue linking yourself to the magic mobile. Urza stated. In a brief PRD of time, though it felt like an eternity to Natsu, the group had started to come up to a nearby cliff that overlooked the city. Given the speed of the magical vehicle, it was nearly impossible to turn, therefore leaving them with only one option. Urza, we won't be able to turn, just shut off the pump. Gray exclaimed. A second later the scarlet-haired mage released a grunt of annoyance at the fact that they were about to stop, but nevertheless she knew what had to be done. The second after she shut off the pump she slammed her foot on the brakes, effectively destroying a good portion of their chosen roadway as she did so. As a result of this, Urza recoiled in the driver's seat, Lucy, Natsu, and presumably Ichigo's body hit the far wall of the vehicle's interior with a loud bang, and Ichigo and Gray flung forward at high speeds due to the fact that, while the car had lost its momentum, they hadn't lost theirs. Ichigo was fortunate enough to have the capability of using his spiritual pressure to stabilize himself and momentarily glide in the air before flipping his body and gracefully landing on the ground. Gray, however, was not so lucky, as evident by the fact that he slammed into a nearby rock formation. At the same time that was preferable to being thrown down the cliff, but it still wasn't something he wanted to do in the first place. Alright, is everyone okay? Urza asked, being the first to speak. I'm still alive. I think. Gray replied in a dazed voice. Same here. Lucy called from within the magic mobile. An instant later one of the vehicle's doors flew open, after which a certain pink-haired dragon slayer flew out and landed face first on the rocky and dust-covered terrain. It was all too likely that he didn't even feel the impact of his fall given that he looked to be out cold. However, momentary groans escaped his lips every so often. Ugh. Natsu ummed out. I think Natsu's broken. Happy exclaimed worriedly, looking down at his best friend from inside the magic mobile. If he's still breathing then he's fine, but I think we could all use a few minutes of rest for the time being. Urza stated before slumping back into her driver's seat, taking a deep breath as she did so. Lucy, is my body still in one piece? Ichigo asked as he walked over to help Gray out of the rock formation. The impact had ironically caused the ice mage to become embedded into the stone like a geological imprint. I think so. Lucy replied. Happy chirped. Ichigo then removed Gray from within the side of the large rock, after which he threw the black-haired wizard over his shoulder and began to walk back to the car, feeling that he should at least do that for his comrade given his current condition was inadvertently his own fault. By the way, Ichigo, what was that just now? No matter how much magical energy the pump absorbs it should only be able to go a certain speed. Urza stated, opening her eyes and staring curiously at the orange-haired substitute. It was at this point that Ichigo realized he had never actually informed the scarlet-haired woman about what had happened to him and why he was now a member of Fairy Tail. Despite the fact that he desperately didn't want to have a long conversation about that fact due to his belief it would lead her to believe he was crazy, one way or another it had to happen if they were working together. To explain that, I guess I should first tell you that. I don't think I ever actually told you about my situation. He continued, only to interrupt it. I was informed back at the train station by Lucy and Gray. While I am both confused and curious, I trust the Master's judgment and believe our current task is more important than any discussions about your background. Urza stated maturely. That actually surprised the substitute a great deal given that he could tell that her words were true. In a way he was impressed by her composure, and she may very well have reacted the most ideally out of anyone he had told outside of Natsu. It did bring into question her sanity in that she so readily believed his story, but that was another matter entirely. Anyway, what I did was a terrible idea and I won't do it again. As for why that happened, I think it had something to do with the fact that magic energy and the type of power that I have are different from one another. Ichigo replied. I see. I will not inquire about this further, but we do need to get going now. If you don't mind, please put Gray and Natsu in the car and take Gray's previous spot on the roof. I doubt he is in a condition to retake that position. Urza said. Ichigo nodded his head in understanding, after which he walked back to the car with the raven-haired ice make user still thrown over his shoulder. Shortly thereafter he put Gray, carefully, into the car and then did the same for Natsu, all the while his thoughts being elsewhere. Well, at least this confirms what I had suspected. Ichigo thought. His little experiment had, in essence, shown him that magical energy and spiritual energy were remotely similar. The only downside to the experiment had been that he in no way expected the magic mobile to react that way to spirit energy. He had only hoped for it to move at the same rate Urza desired it to, but it went far and beyond that. It appeared that though the two energies were similar, spiritual energy packed a bit more of a punch. He just wished he had thought of that possibility beforehand, because if that were the case he wouldn't have picked here and now as the time to test it. Still, it's really strange to think about. I wonder what Kisuke would make of this. DMN, now I know I've lost it when I start to try and get into that lunatic's head. Ichigo thought. Konugi Station, some time later. A horde of dark wizard began to order passengers off of the recently stopped train like SLV drivers. They threw everything off of it, following the orders of their most infamous member to the letter. Watching the entire course of events take place was none other than Aragorn the Reaper. He was a very tall man with silver hair, black eyes, and a melancholy look about him. He wore only a black scarf on his upper body and what appeared to be torn rags of black, tan, and light purple colors. He also sported a great deal of ink on his skin, mainly the series of tattoos covering his upper body in spiraling flame-like patterns and what seemed to be a chain-link tattoo running up his abdomen. Standard sandals covered his feet, and he sported a rather lengthy scythe that he carelessly hung across his shoulders as he continued to observe the passengers' forceful removal with a scowl. Get everything off of the train. Luggage, people, conductors, I want it all gone. If anyone tries to defy us, kill them all. Aragorn ordered commandingly. His subordinates obeyed without delay, speeding up the process just by the simple sound of the Reaper's voice. No one dared to ignore the order, and simply doing nothing after he spoke was a surefire way to end up dead and quickly. Well, looks who's here. Kage said as he got out from one of the train sections, specifically the highly damaged one. Currently there was a hole in the ceiling and in the wall of that particular cart, which annoyed the Reaper to no end. Kageyama, I heard you were coming back aboard this train. There's quite a bit of wreckage, care to explain why? Aragorn asked, growling slightly as he got a good look at the cart's condition. Come on, aren't you interested to see what I brought back with me? Kage asked in a cocky manner. The raven-haired dark wizard reached into his overcoat's pocket, after which he pulled out a flute that caused Aragorn's previously aggravated demeanor to fade in the wake of a sickening smirk. I finally managed to break the seal. Kage added before handing off the wooden death flute to his superior. Excellent, simply excellent. Aragorn stated with evil pleasure. Is that it? One of the members nearby asked. Yes, this is it, men, the forbidden lullaby. Originally it was a tool to capture simply death spells, making it limited. That is until the great dark wizard Zeref turned it into a demon flute. Now its song will kill hundreds, thousands, all at once, and now it's all mine. Aragorn stated before he began to laugh evilly. Chapter 10. Clover, Guild Masters Conference. The building in which each and every guild master across the land currently gathered sparked with liveliness. For people who were presumably of an advanced age, they most certainly were capable of laying back and having a drink or two. I'm so jealous, Mackie, all your wizards are so full of life, and they're such cutie pies. An effeminate bald man named Bob stated. He, incidentally, was the guild master of the Blue Pegasus Guild, and was, in fact, a man. I heard you got a girl who gave some big shot quite the spanking, and that one boy who took down the human traffickers is already building up some praise for your guild. He continued. Oh, that must be Lucy, and the second is Ichigo, hee, they are our latest recruits, and the one girl has a body that just won't quit. Makarov commented perversely, causing the effeminate guild master he was conversing with to coo as a result. I wouldn't be joking around like that. A man called out as he approached. Makarov turned his sights to see that the owner of the voice was none other than the guild master of the Quattro Cerberus Guild. The man had somewhat tan skin, fairly long blonde hair, and a scowl on his face. He currently wore sunglasses, standard-looking clothing, but the strangest thing about him was the spiked dog collar he sported around his neck. Your wizard might be spirited, but you gotta admit they go overboard sometimes. Some of the council members are saying that Fairy Tail is going to destroy an entire city one of these days, and I don't really blame him. Goldmine stated. I'll let those blowhards think what they want, what do I care? They're just jealous that my wizards are hot. Makarov replied, a drunken blush slightly forming on his cheeks. Oh Maki, you shouldn't talk about your wizards that way, you're such a scoundrel. Bob commented. I've also got someone from another world. There ain't a guild in Fiore that can top that. Makarov exclaimed cheerfully before taking another sip of his drink. How much have you had to drink again? Goldmine asked with a raised brow. Message for Master Makarov. A blue carrier bird chirped as it entered the room, a letter being safely secured by its feet. Oh, a letter. Makarov wondered aloud before taking the object in his hand. It's from Mrs. Mira Jane, sir. The bird stated. Well, thank you. Makarov said as he uncaringly looked at the letter. No problem. The bird stated cheerfully before flying off. The elderly mage traced his finger around the seal of the letter, after which the magical properties activated, revealing a hologram image of the very same barmaid that had sent the letter in the first place. Hi Master Makarov, I'm glad that you made it to the conference safe and sound. Mira Jane began, smiling brightly as she always did. See, this is what I'm talking about. This is Mira Jane, she's the poster girl of our guild. Grab some eye candy boys. Makarov stated cheerfully, addressing the mass of surrounding guild masters. Wow, she's a cutie. Bob commented, clasping his hands together. That's Mira Jane. It's been a while since I've seen her. She sure has matured. Goldmine commented. Oh master, you aren't going to believe what happened. It might be the greatest thing in the history of Fairy Tail. Mira Jane cheered over dramatically. Really? Makarov asked confusedly. Urza took Natsu, Gray, Lucy, and Ichigo out on a mission. A pretty amazing combination, huh? In fact, I think they might have formed one of the greatest teams Fairy Tail's ever seen. Sorry to interrupt, but I just had to tell you the news. Mira Jane stated, after which the hologram vanished. Makarov began to sweat bullets and his skin went pale at those words being said. Perhaps Lucy was a blooming celestial wizard who didn't seem like the type capable of destroying excessive amounts of property, but Urza, Natsu, and Gray were proven to be capable of such things. Then there was Ichigo, a man that he didn't know the full capabilities of. He just knew the kid was strong, but how strong he didn't know. Not them. Makarov squealed out in a low voice, after which he fell flat on his back, landing on the very table he had been standing on. What's wrong, Maki? Bob asked with a touch of concern making its way into his voice. I guess the council really does have a reason to be worried. Goldmine mused. I can't believe this is happening. Those three alone really could destroy a city. Makarov thought. The conference was nearly over after today, so he figured he would be able to make it back to Fairy Tail soon enough. He just had to pray they didn't actually destroy an entire city. If that were to happen, not even his patented brand of misdirecting charm would be able to salvage the situation. Peek overlooking the train tracks, with Ichigo and the others. So that's the train those dark wizards hijacked? Ichigo asked, looking down at the railway from within the magic mobile. Yes, with any luck we will be able to reach Ashibana Station and stop them from completing whatever it is they are planning to do. Urza replied. I could understand cars and boats, but why'd they want to hijack a train? Lucy wondered aloud. It doesn't really seem like a good getaway vehicle. Happy added. Well, since a train is used primarily because it is fast, we can assume that they only need to get to the one place. That means that whatever they have planned will probably go down where that train stops. Ichigo reasoned. All the more reason to hurry up. Urza stated before speeding off, the groans of a certain dragon slayer accompanying the continued motion of the magic mobile. Aboard the train. Gah! Kage exclaimed, jumping backwards and narrowly avoiding death by the hand of the Reaper's scythe. They were nearing their destination as they spoke, but at the moment Aragorn was extremely displeased with their situation. No one was supposed to know about Lullaby, and yet thanks to the man he recently attempted to cut into several individuals, and members of the Fairy Tale Guild no less, knew of their plans. Let me get this straight, you allowed a fairy to see the lullaby flute and then let him get away? Is that true? Aragorn asked, clearly agitated. But it's not like he knows about our plans, sir, and even if he did, there's nothing that he and his stupid guild could do that would be able to stop us, right? Kage countered from his position on the floor. The Reaper sent his scythe into the wooden floor of the train that lay but a few inches short of a very vital and cherished body part of every male's body, though this one in particular belonged to Kage. With a scowl on his face, the Reaper then spoke once more. We can't afford to take any chances. Fortunately, we have a strategy in place. Aragorn stated. Right, you mean that thing at Ashibana Station? Kage said, recalling that specific aspect of their plan. We can't have flies buzzing around where they're unwanted. It's up to you men to swat them away. Aragorn said with a sickening smirk. Yes, sir. The Dark Wizards collectively replied. Streets leading up to Ashibana Station. Urza, slow down. Gray exclaimed. Currently the group was within the confines of the magic mobile, save for Gray who was on the roof once again. The vehicle currently sped towards the train station without delay, but the speed came at the cost of Urza's magic energy, which Gray knew all too well. I'm fine. We need to get to the train station quickly, and if all else fails I have the rest of you with me to make up for the difference. Urza replied. She's right, Gray. If we don't make it there in time it could mean people lose their lives. Ichigo stated in agreement. We could get there faster if a certain someone would volunteer to power the magic mobile again. Urza trailed off, silently hoping for an answer in the affirmative. No. Natsu and Gray shouted in unison, prompting everyone else to chuckle as a result. Well, I guess there's your answer. Ichigo replied amusedly, eliciting a small smirk from the red-headed mage. I see, then that just means I'll need to rely on all of you. I hope you're a good fighter, Ichigo, because I'll need you and everyone else to be at your best. Urza said. The magic mobile turned around an approaching corner, rocking the people within it much to the clear dismay of a certain fire dragon slayer. Gah! Natsu ummed from within the car. I really feel bad for him. Ichigo trailed off. Happy said sympathetically. A moment later the pink-haired mage opted to make an attempt to crawl out of the open window. However, both Lucy and Ichigo were there to prevent the dragon slayer from preemptively ending his own life by doing something so colossally stupid. What the hell, Natsu? We're almost there, you moron. Ichigo exclaimed. Yeah, you don't want to fall out. Lucy added. That's what I'm aiming for. Natsu said in a sickly manner. I think I need to tell Lucy something. Happy said from the far side of the seats. What are you mumbling about now? Lucy asked in a tone that possessed a slight edge as she and Ichigo continued to prevent Natsu from crawling out of the car's window. It was actually ironic that this was the case given that in most circumstances it was the actual animal that attempted to get out of the car through the use of the window. Lucy's, weird, hungry, fishy. I like fish. Wait, weird. Happy uttered. Why are you calling me weird? Lucy growled out as she and the substitute successfully reeled in the pink-haired mage. Outside Ashibana Station, some time later. Okay, is everyone ready to go? Urza questioned as they turned to the group. Currently everyone was ready and willing to get on with the mission, save for one individual in particular. Natsu, for all of his love of fighting, was currently subjected to leaning on the body of a certain orange-haired substitute for support. It was likely that if Ichigo wasn't currently holding him up, the teen would have fallen over and stayed there for quite some time. I think Natsu's still got a bit of motion sickness, but I think everyone else is ready. Ichigo replied. Very well, now let's get going. Urza stated. The group then began to walk towards the station, upon which they noticed several peculiar things. Firstly, there was a cloud of smoke coming off of the building that clearly shouldn't have been. Secondly, the entrance was guarded and an accompanying mob of onlookers was gathered. My guess is that they're here already. Ichigo thought. The station is closed due to a train derailment. One of the blue-clad railway workers said through a megaphone. TCH, my butt. Ichigo sneered from his position within the crowd. Wait, where'd Urza go? Lucy wondered aloud, though no one else in their group seemed to have the answer. We ask that all of you remain calm. The man continued, only to stop upon someone tapping his shoulder. I found her. Happy exclaimed, pointing at the red-headed woman who had come up from behind the guard. Maybe she's just trying to get some information. Ichigo mused. What's going on here? Urza asked sternly. Why would I tell you, lady? The man sneered, sweat dropping slightly. In the next instant the scarlet-haired woman sent him flying to the ground with a singular headbutt, effectively knocking him out before moving on to the next worker. What's going on? Urza repeated. She waited for only a second and when the man didn't answer she reacted much the same as prior. You're kidding me. Ichigo trailed off, watching in disbelief as Fairy Tail's strongest female wizard incapacitated the remainder of the blue-clad conductors in the exact same manner she had the first. It seems like her questioning method's a little counterproductive. Lucy said with a deadpanned expression. You think? Ichigo asked rhetorically. Urza's got her own way of getting things done. Gray commented. Where are your clothes? Lucy and Ichigo exclaimed in unison. Damn it! Gray shouted, noticing that he was once again in his boxers. The scarlet-haired mage walked up to the group once more, a serious expression on her face and her thoughts being her own. At the very least she had cleared the way for them to go into the train station and discover for themselves what was happening, so Ichigo supposed that was a benefit. So, did your questioning methods actually get any answers? Ichigo asked, though he already knew the answer. Unfortunately, no, I have failed in that regard, however I will ask that you hit me for my penance at a later time. For now I believe the situation is obvious. Urza stated. Again with the hitting thing? Why does she think I have a desire to hit her and why? Does she seem to want me to? Ichigo wondered confusedly. Eisenwald is inside already, let's go. Urza ordered, receiving a firm nod from everyone else present. Inside Ashibana Station, some time later. The group of mages and the substitute ran down the halls, Natsu still being carried by Ichigo and Happy flying by their collective side. Their destination was the heart of the station, and that's where they knew they'd find the members of Eisenwald. The army sent in a small unit but they've yet to return. I am guessing that they were caught in battle by the Eisenwald forces. Urza stated. They then came up to a staircase, taking note that the very same army unit the scarlet-haired mage had been referencing was currently littering it with their unconscious bodies. Lucy shuddered at the sight, but everyone else merely scowled at the implications. If they didn't know before, now they knew that Eisenwald was definitely here in the station. They've been completely wiped out. Happy said fearfully as they continued to walk down the halls, catching the sight of the remaining soldiers as they did so. They went up against an entire guild. A small contingent of soldiers like this would be no match for such a powerful group. Urza stated. The group finally arrived at the nexus of the station, each prepared for any ambush or potential trap that would occur. Well, at least 3 of them were. Lucy, Happy, and obviously Natsu weren't really in the condition to think about such things. When they finally entered the main room, a wicked voice sounded off to greet them. "Ha ha ha, welcome, step into our parlor, fairy tale flies." Aragorn greeted as his guild's enemies entered the room. "Hee hee hee." The dark wizards snickered in unison. Ichigo and the others immediately examined the room's inhabitants, instantly taking note that there were a huge number of wizards all around. It was hard to get a rough estimate, but he was positive that they outnumbered the group of thugs he took out by at least twice as much. Once the sheer number of men within the room was addressed, that's when they all noticed a particular individual, the man who each knew to be behind this plot. Off to the side sat a silver-haired man with a large scythe carelessly hoisted over his left shoulder. A wicked grin as etched on his face, and one could just tell he was evil to his core. "You fiend. I take it you're Aragorn the Reaper?" Urza questioned with narrowed eyes. "Hee hee hee." Aragorn chuckled evilly. Since they had entered the room, Ichigo had opted to rest Natsu on the floor, for multiple reasons, but the main one was that he couldn't necessarily fight if he had to carry around a body over his shoulder. He did that once, but in that instance his opponent was just a single man, not an entire dark guild. Currently, the blonde-haired celestial spirit mage was making repeated attempts to wake him out of his motion sickness-induced stupor. As of this very moment in time, she had been unsuccessful in doing so. "Come on Natsu, we need you for this," Lucy pleaded as she shook the dragon slayer in an attempt to wake him up. "Good luck. Between trains, magic mobiles, and your shacking, it's a motion sickness triple combo," Happy stated. "I'm not a vehicle," Lucy exclaimed. "Hey, you're the guys who got me in trouble with Aragorn, get up you pink-haired insect," Kage ordered from the front lines of the Dark Wizards. "I know that voice." Natsu trailed off, struggling to bring himself off the ground. "Enough of this. We are not threatened by any of you. Tell me what you have planned this instant," Urza exclaimed, her voice booming with authority. "Oh, you haven't heard yet?" Aragorn asked amusedly. A second later he got up from his seated position and flew into the air directly halfway between the two opposing sides, the same smirk still etched on his face. "He can fly," Lucy exclaimed. "It's wind magic," Happy realized. "What do all train stations have?" Aragorn inquired, subsequently after which his feet touched down on the crystal ball that sat atop a collective combination of 4 speakers. When he had done this, most members of the group immediately understood what the Reaper had been referring to. "You plan to broadcast the Lullaby's song?" Urza guessed. "Hee hee hee hee, thousands of nosy onlookers have flocked to this station to get a glimpse of the action. Who knows? If I raise the volume of the song loud enough I may be able to destroy the entire city with my melody of death," Aragorn proclaimed. "UBSTRD. Ichigo thought, his fists balling at the words of the silver-haired man. Let's just say he had no love for people who had no objection to destroying the population of an entire city for their own purposes. What reason do you have for committing such a heinous crime against the innocent people of this town?" Urza growled out. "This is a cleansing of all the fools out there who fail to appreciate the rights they hold so dear, who remain ignorant to those who've had their rights stripped away. They've committed the sin of turning a blind eye to the world's injustice. Therefore, the Reaper has come to punish them," Aragorn stated. "What would that fix? It's things like this that are why you were kicked out of the wizarding guilds in the first place," Lucy countered. "Hee hee, we've given up trying to regain our rights. We want power, and then we will be able to wash away the sins of the past and then use that power to create a new future," Aragorn replied. "You monster!" Urza exclaimed angrily. "Oh, and what are you going to do, Abu?" Aragorn began, only to stop upon feeling a massive pressure hit his entire being. Almost everyone in the entire room felt the full force of this mysterious pressure, and the moment that it started the source became quite clear. Each and every one of the dark wizards and fairy tale mages alike turned to look at the form of the orange-haired teen, who gave off a light blue aura around his body. If the scowl and glare he was directing at the dark wizard's leader were anything to go by, he definitely wasn't pleased. What is this pressure? Urza wondered, a bead of sweat running down the side of her cheek. Most others were thinking the exact same thing, but such thoughts were pushed to the back of their minds, in the case of the dark wizards, upon the orange-haired teen grabbing what appeared to be a wooden skull badge, after which he seemed to separate into two different bodies. What the hell? Several whispered from within the ranks of the dark wizards. Gotcha. Lucy said as she caught the body. Thanks, Lucy. I appreciate it. Ichigo said evenly, though he didn't bother looking back in favor of maintaining his scowl and glare at the man who had set him off a great deal. An instant later he grabbed the hilt of his long cleaver-like sword and brought it out in front of his body, subsequently after which the cloth surrounding the blade disappeared, revealing Zangetsu in all of his glory. I don't think I've ever seen that kind of magic before. Just who are you, fairy tale fly? Aragorn asked, not shifting from his position atop the speakers. My name is Ichigo Kurosaki, and I've heard enough out of you. Ichigo answered in an agitated manner. Ha ha ha. And just what? Aragorn began. He was cut off before he got a chance to finish his sentence due to the orange-haired teen leaping up into the air and charging directly at him. The physical strength someone would need to do something like that alone was mind-boggling, and yet this boy had done it with seemingly no effort whatsoever. With widened eyes, Aragorn brought up his scythe, barely managing to block the sword strike of his opponent. Doing so, however, sent him flying into a nearby pillar, which cracked due to the sheer force that resulted from Aragorn's collision with it. Ichigo, on the other hand, performed a backflip and gracefully landed on the ground a decent amount ahead of the others in his group. His front was still facing the dark wizards, and the perpetual scowl and glare were still marking his features. That was impressive. Urza thought. No way. Many of the dark wizards exclaimed out of disbelief. No one should be able to do this to me. Aragorn thought as he got up from the hole he had made in the pillar. My mistake. Ichigo began, drawing the attention of the wind magic user as he spoke. Aragorn flew out of the hole and glared heavily at the black-clad teen, obviously being annoyed by the fact that he was so easily taken by surprise in front of his subordinates. Moreover, the teen didn't even seem as if he had expended any effort at all. Next time I won't miss. Ichigo stated. You really think I can be defeated so easily? It doesn't matter, I have more important things to do than to mess around with flies like you. Take care of them, men. Show them the terror of the Dark Guild Eisenwald. Aragorn shouted before flying off. You heard him, boys, let's take care of this. Kage stated. An instant later the shadow magic user placed the palm of his hand directly onto the floor and willed 3 separate shadowy tendrils to charge forth in an attempt to take out the group that stood behind Ichigo. They moved very quickly, but even from the start they didn't have a chance to do any real damage. Just as the hands popped out of the ground, poised to slash and claw at the seemingly unprepared mages, a fire-shielded fist tore them to shreds. You! Kage growled, looking directly at the face of the pink-haired mage that had just countered his attack. Good to have you back, Natsu. Ichigo commented, turning to face the pink-haired mage with Zangetsu laying across his shoulders. Heh, it's nice to be back. Now Wadaya say we start kicking some butt, fairy tale style. Natsu asked rhetorically, pounding his fists together and coating them with a layer of thick fire. No, I need you and Grey to go after Aragorn. My magic energy may not be 100%, but I can still fight these underlings off with Ichigo and Lucy here. The 3 of us will stay here and take care of them while you make sure Lullaby isn't used here at the station. Urza ordered. Both of the requested mages looked at one another with a scornful look, obvious not looking forward to teaming up or following such a direct order from the bossiest person they had ever met in their life. Still, even if they were going to complain, they'd save it for when lives weren't at stake. Right. The two replied in unison. If the two of you work together there isn't anything you can't do, N. Urza began, only to stop upon turning around to see that the two had yet to move and were instead butting heads with one another. What did I say? Urza barked. The two said in unison before running off. They just ran off. One of the dark wizards commented. They're goin' after Aragorn. Another stated. I've got it. One of the wizards proclaimed. The owner of the voice then willed several gauze-like extensions to fly towards a nearby railing and grip it, subsequently after which the wizard was pulled up onto higher ground. The great Rayul will take them down. He added. I'm coming with you. That pink-haired dimwit's gonna pay. Kage stated before he vanished into the floor, becoming nothing more than a wandering shadow. We'll catch up to them when we've finished up with the rest of the men here, okay? Urza said. Just us against an entire magical guild? Lucy asked shakily. Hee, Mama always told me not to hit a girl, but this time I'll make an exception. One of the men stated evilly. Sorry ladies, but when we're done with you you're not gonna look nearly as cute. Another sneered, cracking his knuckles. But without my stunning beauty I'll be totally helpless. Lucy stated vainly. This is not time for daydreaming, Lucy. Happy exclaimed. Now that's just rude, going after the girls first. What kind of scumbags are you? Ichigo asked, turning to face the group of enemies once again. Who does this kid think he is? Just because you got the jump on Aragorn when he wasn't looking, you think you can talk to us like that? One of the dark wizards asked angrily. Are you idiots just going to sit around all day or are we going to fight? Ichigo asked in a bored tone, his Zanpakuto still resting across his shoulders. Don't act so tough, you brat. It's all of us versus the three of you. A random dark wizard remarked. The man's comment, however, only caused Ichigo to smirk cockily given that he knew perfectly well how this fight was going to end. Yeah, you're right, it isn't really a fair fight, for you. Ichigo stated confidently. Bring it on, Berry Boy. One of the men challenged. No sooner than that particular insult was uttered did Ichigo leap into battle. His Zanpakuto instantly cut the weapons of at least 5 or 6 men in the first strike, and very clearly none of them had seen him coming. That was very quick. Urza thought, her eyes slightly widened at the sight of the orange-haired teen's natural speed. Quickly, each of the nearby dark wizards made an attempt to make up for their not seeing him make the first move of the battle, but little did they know that was the perfectly incorrect decision to make. The second they attempted to mount a counterattack, Ichigo took them all down with varied swings of his sword, causing them to shoot outwardly all across the room. What the hell? Several of the mages exclaimed. Ichigo didn't even stop to make a smug remark or correct the dark wizards for getting his namesake incorrect, but to be perfectly honest the sooner this was dealt with the better. He had taken down a good amount, already over a dozen in number, but there were still plenty more to deal with. He's swinging that big sword as if it weighs nothing. Lucy said in awe. The only time the blonde-haired mage had actually seen Ichigo use the sword in combat was the incident at Harem when they had first met, and even in that instance she wasn't paying particular attention to how well he wielded the blade. Every other instance she had seen him use his hands or had heard of an event where this was the case. Indeed, it is quite impressive to say the least. Urza stated, smirking as she watched the orange-haired teen rip into another pile of dark wizards. Bringing him seems to have been a good suggestion. I'll have to thank Mira later. Urza thought. It's just one wizard men. Take him down. One of the mages exclaimed as he and a group of others started to surround the teen. Well, I'd feel a bit silly if I didn't get in on at least some of the fighting. Urza thought aloud. A moment later she extended her right hand, subsequently after which a large red magic seal appeared, giving way to a magical sword a moment later. The sword itself was rather standard in appearance, but even so the speed at which it was summoned was rather impressive. Oh wow, a magic sword. Lucy observed. I suggest you surrender now before I lose my temper. Urza exclaimed before jumping into the fray. The scarlet-haired mage tore into one of the sides of the encirclement that had been surrounding Ichigo, which though unneeded did give the substitute the ability to charge the other half. Each began to rip through enemy after enemy, not even receiving so much as a scratch and easily dispatching of anyone who dared to cross their path. Get the redhead while that guy's distracted. One of the dark wizards exclaimed. Ichigo's eyes instantly shifted to see a group of 3 enemies extending their open right palms, collectively, towards the unsuspecting fairy tale wizard. An instant later 3 separate rays of golden magical energy shot forth, each appearing to have been dead set on hitting Urza. Thinking on her feet, the red-headed knight quickly jumped into the air, causing the magical projectiles to do little more than crack the floor she had previously stood over. While still in the air, she then held out her sword and seemingly replaced it with a long spear in an instant. You'll have to do better than that. Urza exclaimed. She then soared towards the ground, instantly taking out the wizards that had mounted the simultaneous attack on her with relative ease. When that was done, the infamous Requip user then shifted her sights towards another nearby collection of dark wizards, each of whom were currently debating on whether or not to surround Ichigo or attempt to fight her. In the next instant she recalled the spear and summoned twin swords, each shorter than her previous magical sword, before she charged the gathering of enemies, effectively making use of their indecision for her own strategic purposes. Not bad. Ichigo thought with a smirk as he continued to cut down drone after drone that attempted to take him down. I've never seen anybody able to requip as fast as this chick, and no matter how many of our men go after that orange-haired guy he doesn't even break a sweat. The assumed leader stated. What's requip? Lucy asked from the sidelines. Magic weaponry isn't that much different from your celestial magic, Lucy. The user can summon weapons that they keep stored in their magical space, and when they use their switches between weapons it's called requiping. Happy explained. Wow, that's incredibly. Lucy said excitedly. You ain't seen nothin' yet. Urza's just getting warmed up. Happy proclaimed. Did she just say Urza? One of the members wondered aloud. Forget about that. Somebody go after the blonde chick for crying out loud. She can't be nearly as tough as these two. The apparent leader shouted. A large group of the dark mages then turned their sights towards the blonde-haired celestial wizard, after which they began to run towards her, weapons primed and ready to cut her into pieces as if she were ribbon. TCH, time for me to kick some butt. Lucy stated. Why are you trying to steal the spotlight from them? Happy asked confusedly. Open gate of the giant crab, Cancer. Lucy exclaimed. The instant after the gate opened, said celestial spirit appeared at the blonde's beck and call. He appeared to be relatively tall, have rather tan skin, and had 3 pairs of crab legs sprouting from his back. His overall appearance was that of a barber, 2 separate pairs of scissors being located in each of his hands. You need me to take care of the dudes, baby? Cancer asked in a calm fashion. Yeah, take em out with style. Lucy requested. The men simultaneously charged the celestial mage, yet again this proved to be a mistake. In a split second the crab spirit cut up their weapons and left them all bald-headed and dejected, at which point they all just fell on the ground with panicked expressions on their faces. Like their new style, baby? Cancer asked. That was impressive. Urza complimented. Oh really? Thanks, but it was no big deal. Lucy replied sheepishly. The red-headed knight then summoned an axe and tore into yet another group of wizards. However stupid they may have been, no one could say they weren't persistent. Alright. I totally scored points with Urza. Lucy exclaimed happily. However, this crab spirit of yours. The way he calls you baby. I find it rather insulting. Urza added. Points unscored. Lucy mumbled in a melancholic manner. Ouch, but whoa. Cancer uttered. On the other side of the room a large group of dark wizards had once again started to encircle Ichigo in what had to be their third synchronized attempt to even wound him as a collective group. However, they had done the same to Urza from the opposite end. The final result was a large group of wizards surrounding two teenage warriors who were currently standing back to back with one another, their weapons drawn and their expressions deadly serious. Urza, when I say duck, all right? Ichigo requested. The scarlet-haired mage gave a confused glance towards the teenage substitute, but before she could ask a single question their common enemies had charged, their swords prepared to stab into them without any delay. Get them men. One of the men roared. Duck. Ichigo shouted. Without giving it a second thought, Urza followed the command, though she was highly confused as to why this was requested of her. That confusion, however, evaporated in the wake of what happened next. With one swift, powerful motion, Ichigo turned his body and swept across the incoming wizards, the end result of which was for them to be pushed back almost instantaneously. Their weapons shattered and their bodies flew all over the room, successfully ending their offensive for the time being and allowing the two fairy tale members some room to breathe. Very impressive. Urza complimented. Thanks, but we're not done yet. Ichigo commented, noticing that a final large mass of enemies had just gathered at their front. A head-on assault was likely the dumbest thing they had tried thus far, but this was collectively everyone that remained and was capable of putting up a fight. Even those who had been moderately wounded in the previous engagements were getting up in order to mount one final offensive. There are still so many. Urza thought aloud. Then we just have to take them down, plain and simple. Ichigo stated. You've taken down your fair share already, please allow me to take down the rest. Urza requested. Before Ichigo could even verbally acknowledge that he was perfectly fine with that, the scarlet-haired mage began to access her greatest magical ability. Her armor and clothing began to vanish and her body glowed with an ethereal golden light that shined so brightly it felt as if it were the sun itself. Whoa, her armor's disappearing. One of the dark wizards cheered. What the hell is wrong with you perverts? Ichigo shouted angrily, not understanding how they could find a way to make this seem dirty. They couldn't even see anything either, not that he was looking, he just happened to notice that this was the case. When the transformation was complete, Urza was covered with an entirely different set of armor. Her neck and stomach were uncovered but plated armor with a large metal flower over it covered her brsts, a large billowing skirt with metal plating on its upper area covered her lower body, and pair of large metal wings that appeared to be made of blades themselves sprouted from the middle of her back. Within the palms of her hands lay a pair of identical swords, the very same color as her armor. Most magic swordsmen only have the ability to swap their weapon. But Urza is able to swap out armor for wizarding armor that enhances her abilities. It's a talent that only she possesses, that's what makes her special. It's a technique called the Night. Happy stated as the transformation came to light. Now. Urza began, floating up into the air as she spoke. Dance my swords. She exclaimed, summoning a spinning wheel of identical swords that acted as a virtual army on their own. I knew it, this had gotta be her. Kuraka uttered fearfully. Circle sword. Urza shouted, sending the large spinning wheel of blade directly at the large group of dark wizards. Within an instant the entirety of the enemy force was incapacitated save for two men who had evidently been giving the commands to the others. With their subordinates taken out of the picture, however, they were not even a remote threat. Whoa, she took them all down with a single swipe. Lucy exclaimed. Happy said excitedly. Impressive. Ichigo complimented, turning his back to the remaining two and staring up at the red-headed wizard with a smirk on his features. Thank you. Urza said, smirking slightly as well. Alright, you're dealing with me now. Bayard exclaimed, jumping up into the air and making to punch the female knight with a magically reinforced fist. Don't do it, Bayard. Do you have any idea who that woman is? Kuraka shouted. He, however, was far too late, as with a single slash of her twin swords Urza had defeated the dark wizard known as Bayard and sent him falling down to the floors of the train station, while she herself did the same, though she landed on her feet as opposed to on her face. "She's queen of the fairies, Titania Urza," Kuraka exclaimed fearfully, only watching as his comrade hit the ground. With nearly all of Eisenwald's forces eliminated, or at least those who were in the immediate area, Urza pulled back her equip armor in favor of her normal Heartcruise attire. She kept a stern look at the remaining dark wizard and practically challenged him to make a move, immediately after which said man started to sweat bullets. "To hell with this, I'm getting out of here," Kuraka proclaimed before running off. "I would imagine he went to look for Aragorn. You should follow him," Urza stated, looking back at her two comrades as she spoke. "Who, me?" Lucy asked confusedly, gesturing a finger to herself. "Just do it," Urza ordered in an agitated manner, a glint appearing in her eyes. "Whatever you say," Lucy exclaimed before running off. The blonde was surprisingly fast when she was afraid if the time it took her to exit the room was any significant indicator. She had left in about 3 seconds, but shortly thereafter a certain red-headed knight began to fall to the ground, her face clearly weary and several beads of sweat visible on her forehead. Before she could even land on a single knee, however, a hand caught her own and lessened her fall, allowing her to gather herself and make it seem as if it were just a tired gesture. "You really did wear yourself out, did you?" Ichigo reasoned, recalling very clearly what Fairy Tail's resident ice mage had warned the redhead about on several different occasions. "Gray was right, I used up too much magic energy on our way here," Urza replied, allowing herself to be helped up by the orange-haired teen. "Even so, we took out all of the grunts. All that's left are the guy Lucy went after, the two that followed Natsu and Gray, and then Aragorn." Ichigo mused. "Yes, that is true. While I do think Natsu and Gray are capable of taking down Aragorn, I believe it necessary for us to find a way to clear the crowd to prevent any lives from being lost," Urza stated, her opinion matching that of the substitute. "Good idea. Were you thinking of using the balcony or the speaker system?" Ichigo inquired. "Finding the area where the speakers controls are would take too much time. All we need to do is address the crowd outside the station and warn them," Urza replied. "A light, then we should get going," Ichigo mused, receiving a nod from the red-headed woman before the two ran off in unison. Ashibana Station, with Natsu and Gray. The raven-haired ice-make user ran through the halls of the train station alongside the person that aggravated him more than anyone else. They traveled in silence, but the scowls and glares they each sported served to show just about how much they enjoyed being in one another's company. "I can't believe she's making us work together. What was she thinking?" Gray grumbled angrily, being the first to break the silence. "Obviously she wasn't thinking, everybody knows ice and fire don't mix," Natsu added. "Yeah, and why is she so freakin' bossy?" Gray exclaimed. "She should just ask us to do stuff instead of ordering us around," Natsu roared angrily, after which the two wizards stopped and turned to one another with an annoyed expression. "I don't need your help, I can beat Aragorn all by myself," they shouted in unison. "Are you copying me?" the two asked one another, butting heads as they did so. In the next instant each noticed that at the end of the hall the path separated into two different directions, either of which could be the proper way to find Aragorn in order to stop him. At the same time, they both couldn't go down one, otherwise they risked the chance of being incorrect and allowing the wind magic user to escape. "Which way do we go?" Natsu asked evenly. "I guess we'll have to split up," Gray mused. The two then went off to separate portions of the opposite hallways, their backs to one another and their fists ready to bring this mission to a close the second that they found Aragorn, or if they did rather. Even so, something was still left to be said, as evident by the fact that the two comrades had yet to diverge. "Natsu, we're up against an evil freak who's about to unleash a deadly spell. If you find him, give him a thrashing," Gray stated, turning to face the dragon slayer with a small smirk on his face. You don't have to tell me twice. I owe that JRK for messing with Fairy Tail, so I'm gonna burn him to a crisp. Natsu replied, also smirking. The two then seemingly realized they were acting friendly and opted to change their attitudes, giving a slight huff before turning their backs to one another once again. Don't die on me. Gray muttered under his breath. What? Natsu asked confusedly. Nothin', later loser. Gray said, waving the Dragon Slayer off before he ran down his selected hall. The Ice Mage ran down the hall for but a few seconds before rounding the corner and seeing a sign that indicated the broadcasting studio was just up ahead. Realizing this, his eyes widened and he stopped dead in his tracks. They must be planning to broadcast Lullaby's song through the speaker system. If that's the case, then this is where they'd be. Gray mused. Without wasting a moment, he ran the remaining distance that separated him and the control center, quickly coming up towards the door and kicked it open in an urgent manner. He had fully expected to find Aragorn getting ready to sound off the melody of death, but when he opened the door nothing was in the room. It was devoid of any evident life. There's nobody here, maybe I was wrong about him broadcasting it over the station's PA. Gray thought aloud. His eyes widened a moment later and he was forced to jump out of the way of a surprise attack that came from directly above his previous position. When the Ice Mage had regained his footing, he looked back to see a smirking dark wizard with extending gauze rings that acted as if they were added limbs. That was a pretty good guess, pal, but our plan's nowhere near that obvious. Rayul chided as he hung from the ceiling through the use of his brand of magic. Then you're gonna tell me what the plan is so you don't get hurt. Gray stated matter-of-factly, smirking heavily at the form of his opponent. Ashibana Station, platform overlooking the city, with Urza and Ichigo. Well, at least we found a good place to warn them. Ichigo reasoned as the two looked down on the gathered crowd. At a conservative estimate, the number of gathered civilians numbered in the hundreds, which mean that they had to give their warning very delicately. In fact, it might even prove to be a good idea to lie just to prevent a panic, which would likely ensue if they were under the impression that their lives were all at risk if they stayed put. Yes, now all that is left to do is warn them. Urza stated. So how do you want to handle it? I mean, we can't just... Ichigo began, only to be cut off by the audible high-pitched sound a megaphone made when it was usually being started up. The substitute looked over at his comrade with a raised brow, taking note that the megaphone was, indeed, within her hands. That, however, raised more concerns than it addressed. However, at the same time she couldn't be about to say what he thought she would say. She wouldn't do that, would she? Ichigo wondered. Listen to me, everyone, if you value your lives you will leave this place at once. This station has been taken over by evil wizards. They are threatening to cast a deadly spell over the loudspeakers that would kill everyone here. Urza began. Even from a great distance above, Ichigo could see the fear-stricken expressions of the pedestrians. He wanted to say something, but at the same time he supposed that 1, nothing could be done to take back what Urza had said, and 2, as long as they left quickly enough it wouldn't matter in the long run. Still, it was very clear that tact was not one of the scarlet-haired wizard's strong suits. I beg you, run as far as you can. Urza finished, allowing the megaphone to rest by her hip after she had done so. Ah ha! The crowd screamed as each and every one of them collectively took the advice of the red-headed woman. If anything, they were at least panicking in an organized fashion, otherwise they wouldn't have all ran the same direction in a near-perfect formation. That did confuse Ichigo slightly, but given that it worked to their advantage he didn't question it. Hey lady, why would you make everyone panic like that? One of the conductors asked, coming onto the platform with several others to see why this was the case. I would rather they panic than watch them die. In fact, you gentlemen need to leave as well. Urza stated, raising a good point. You heard her, get moving. Trust me when I say you won't want to be near this place with what the dark wizards have planned. Ichigo stated. All right. Another of the conductors replied. The group of station employees took the advice of the duo before they began to run off, clearly being inelegant enough to discern that at the very least their jobs were not worth their lives. When this was done, Ichigo turned to Urza with a neutral expression, after which he made to speak. "Good job clearing out all the civilians." Ichigo complimented, keeping his small concerns with her method to himself. "Yes, now that they are all no longer in danger, all we need to do is find Aragorn," Urza stated, turning to face the substitute once again. When she did so, however, her face morphed into an expression of shock and slight amounts of terror, almost as if something horrible had happened. Ichigo noticed this almost instantly, after which he turned as well, and his reaction was much the same upon seeing what had happened. The station itself was completely surrounded by a practical tornado. Wind raged in a circular motion all around it, which likely meant that nothing could get in and nothing could get out. "A wind barrier," Urza uttered. "Hee hee hee." Aragorn's light laughter came from the air behind the two. Ichigo immediately grabbed the hilt of his Zanpakuto and turned to face the well-known magical criminal with a determined expression. Urza did much the same, though she didn't bother summoning a weapon, rather she just settled on staring up at the floating wind magic user with a shocked expression. "So do you intend to fight us while we're separated from the others?" Ichigo asked, glaring at the silver-haired man. "Don't flatter yourself. I do owe you a thrashing from before, and while I also would relish the opportunity to fight the Queen of the Fairies, I don't have any time to waste on you," Aragorn stated smugly. Before either Ichigo or Urza could react, the Eisenwald ace brought up his left hand and simply opened its palm, effectively creating a small hole in the wind barrier and simultaneously willing a powerful gust of wind to send both of his enemies flying back into the barrier. "What the hell?" Ichigo wondered, having not been prepared for such a thing occurring. "Aragorn!" Urza shouted angrily as she charged into the sides of the wind barrier. The scarlet-haired knight made brief contact with the surface of the rapidly moving winds, but she shot backwards a great distance shortly thereafter, landing on her arm and releasing a slight groan due to her apparent injury. "It's hopeless. There's no way you'll ever be able to break free of my magic sealing barrier. You see, it's one way, if you try to escape the wind will tear you apart," Aragorn said confidently. "What is the meaning of this?" Urza exclaimed, picking herself up from the ground and lightly clenching her injured arm. "Sorry, but you'll have to excuse me. You fairy tale flies have wasted enough of our time," Aragorn stated before flying off. "DMN." Urza spat, obviously being disappointed with recent events. "Are you alright?" Ichigo asked, observing that the redhead was still holding on to her arm. "I'm perfectly fine. My pride has taken a hit, but I can manage," Urza replied honestly. "What the hell was that about? Why would he go to all the trouble of sealing us inside here? Clearly his target isn't the city, so then what is his plan?" Ichigo wondered aloud. Urza stood in place, thinking on the orange-haired teen's words with a determined expression gracing her features. However, the moment something very specific occurred to her, and when it did her face morphed into one of terror. "The Guild Masters' Conference!" Urza exclaimed worriedly. "What? Is it even possible for Aragorn to get there from this station without a train?" Ichigo asked in a surprised tone. Any normal wizard would be unable to navigate the canyon, and transportation by way of a magic mobile wouldn't work since the trains usually run that route. However, Aragorn is capable of flight, and since there will be no witnesses to see him coming, Urza began. Then he's got a free ticket to target the Guild Masters, Ichigo realized, eliciting a nod from fairy tale's greatest female wizard. "Yes, precisely. If that's the case then he's played us for fools," Urza stated, growling slightly as she finished. She truly hated to be outsmarted in such a way, and due to the fact that it had been by a dark wizard it made her all the more bitter. "Wait, don't we know any way to defuse the barrier? Maybe we can force one of the dark wizards to do it," Ichigo suggested. "That's brilliant. That one wizard who was capable of breaking the seal on Lullaby would surely be able to dispel Aragorn's wind barrier," Urza said happily. Only problem is that he and some other guy went after Natsu and Gray. Ichigo commented. Well, he didn't come after me. Gray trailed off as he entered the room. Gray. Why are you here? Where is Natsu? Urza questioned evenly. I'm here because I got one of the Eisenwald goons to tell me their plans. They want to use Lullaby on. Gray began, only to be cut off. The Guildmasters Conference, right? Ichigo and Urza said in unison. Yeah, anyway, even if we know that, it doesn't change the fact that we fell for their trap. Still, if what you said is true, all we have to do is find that Kageyama guy and we can make him dispel the wind barrier. Gray mused. Then we need to find those two as soon as possible. Ichigo stated. Urza nodded in agreement, after which the trio ran off to find the dim-witted dragon slayer, who beyond a shadow of a doubt had no idea what was going on. They just prayed he didn't go overboard and wind up knocking out Kageyama, otherwise they'd be in some serious trouble. Come on Natsu, I've got faith in you. Ichigo thought, mimicking those of Urza and, to a lesser extent, Gray. Chapter 11. Wait, don't we know any way to defuse the barrier? Maybe we can force one of the dark wizards to do it. Ichigo suggested. That's brilliant. That one wizard who was capable of breaking the seal on Lullaby would surely be able to dispel Aragorn's wind barrier. Urza said happily. Only problem is that he and some other guy went after Natsu and Gray. Ichigo commented. Well, he didn't come after me. Gray trailed off as he entered the room. Gray. Why are you here? Where is Natsu? Urza questioned evenly. I'm here because I got one of the Eisenwald goons to tell me their plans. They want to use Lullaby on. Gray began, only to be cut off. The Guildmasters Conference, right? Ichigo and Urza said in unison. Yeah, anyway, even if we know that, it doesn't change the fact that we fell for their trap. Still, if what you said is true, all we have to do is find that Kageyama guy and we can make him dispel the wind barrier. Gray mused. Then we need to find those two as soon as possible. Ichigo stated. Urza nodded in agreement, after which the trio ran off to find the dim-witted dragon slayer, who beyond a shadow of a doubt had no idea what was going on. They just prayed he didn't go overboard and wind up knocking out Kageyama, otherwise they'd be in some serious trouble. Come on Natsu, I've got faith in you. Ichigo thought, mimicking those of Urza and, to a lesser extent, Gray. Ashibana Station, with Natsu. Aragorn. Natsu shouted as he pounded through door after door. Any room within his sight the Dragon Slayer would walk up to and use his flame-covered fist to blow the entrance, and a good portion of the surrounding walls, to smithereens. He hadn't had any luck as of yet, but that didn't deter him in the slightest. If anything, it only encouraged his rampant tirade of destruction. Aragorn, come out wherever you are. Natsu exclaimed, decimating yet another doorway and the brick that surrounded it. TCH, doesn't this guy know how to use a door? Kage wondered aloud as he followed the dim-witted fairy tale wizard from the shadows. He seeped back into the floor of the station, after which he began to silently follow the fire wizard once more. All he needed was a single opportunity to strike and the fight would be over. In fact, by his standpoint, their confrontation was over before it even began. Now that Aragorn's made it out safely, this kid doesn't pose much of a threat, at least not to anything that isn't a door. Kage thought, observing as the pink-haired wizard smashed through half of the hallway he had just rounded. Show yourself, Aragorn. Natsu roared. I could just let him go, but what would be the fun in that? Kage wondered, surfacing from the floor directly behind the fairy tale wizard. Natsu turned, instantly sensing that an attack was coming, but he was far too late. Around 4 of the shadowy tendrils took the form of fists and pounded into his body without delay. He himself shot backwards into a large amount of wooden crates, but he'd taken worse hits. There, I've wanted to do that for a while now. Had enough fairy tale insect. Kage taunted as his opponent struggled to free himself of the surrounding debris. Not you again. Natsu exclaimed, coming up from the crate's remnants with his head having gone through a painting. Wow, you look like an idiot. Kage commented, smirking at how truly idiotic the pink-haired teen looked. Ah, shut it, doggy. Natsu said, causing a tick mark to appear on the raven-haired wizard's forehead. It's Kage. Not doggy, Kage. He exclaimed. Same thing really. Natsu muttered underneath his breath. I think I've got you figured out. You eat fire to increase your power, and, now that I know that, it shouldn't be too hard to stamp out. Kage stated contentedly. Whatever, just tell me where Aragorn is. Natsu demanded. TCH, you'll have to beat it out of me, fairy tale insect. Kage scoffed. My pleasure. Natsu said with a bloodthirsty grin. Ashibana Station, Central Chambers. The remnants of the Eisenwald Guild currently either sat in place with ropes surrounding their bodies, courtesy of a very agitated red-headed teen, or lay on the ground, unconscious and unable to truly do anything at the moment. However, one remained conscious despite having taken a very large hit from the Fairy Queen, though he still was incapable of moving. How long are you going to sit there hiding, Kuraka? Bayard asked in a low voice, his wounds not allowing him to speak any louder. I'm sorry, but I was scared. Kuraka stated, phasing his upper body out of the wall he currently sat within. Never mind that now, the wind barrier is up, and now we need to make sure that they don't escape. To do that, you need to find Kageyama before they figure out he can dispel the barrier. Bayard stated. No, please don't make me. You know I'm no good in a fight, Bayard. Kuraka pleaded, obviously fearing that he would be caught by the enemy. Calm down. I'm sure even you can handle this. Bayard said confidently, only eliciting quiet groaning from the green-haired phase magic user. Ashibana Station, with Ichigo, Urza, and Gray. Gray, are you sure this is near the place where Natsu and you separated? Ichigo asked, turning to the ice mage as the group continued to run down the halls. Positive. Though I don't know where the fire-breathing moron wound up after we split. For all I know he blew up every wall he could find and tried to look for Aragorn that way. Gray commented. That does sound like something he'd do. Ichigo thought. The group rounded the next hallway, after which they began to see a vast majority of doors and walls completely destroyed. Incidentally, the aspect that made it a practical footprint for Natsu was the fact that the debris and the shattered stones were covered with ashes, likely due to a fire-based attack having been used to initially destroy the doors. We must be getting close. Urza mused. A moment later a loud resounding boom sounded off from several hallways down, which only caused each and every one of them to speed up more so. It sounded as if Natsu just went overboard, which he almost always did, but in this case it was the perfectly wrong thing to do. Upon running down to the end of the next hallway, they saw the Dragon Slayer standing directly in front of Kage, the very man they wanted to find. Currently, he appeared alive, but it had also seemed that Natsu had so stealthily punched him through a wall. I've really got to talk to him about not blowing things up all the time. Ichigo mentally noted. Property damage was definitely one of Natsu's strong points, however that may very well have been more of a detriment than a useful skill. Natsu, do not harm him, we need him alive. Urza exclaimed as she and the other ran up the staircase. Way to go, you fire freak. Gray commented sarcastically, taking note that the dark wizard looked worse for wear. Wah! Natsu uttered, turning to face the group. The Dragon Slayer paled as he saw his scarlet-haired comrade raise a magical sword high in the air, having it pulled back and making to swing it directly at him. He began to sweat bullets, mostly because he didn't even know why this was happening. I don't know what I did wrong, but I'm sorry. Natsu said, holding his hands up defensively as the Queen of the Fairies continued to move closer and closer towards him. Natsu released a quiet but fearful squeak upon hearing the sword cut into the stone wall behind him, indicating that he, for the moment, hadn't invoked Titania's wrath. All the same, he still feared for his life at the mere implication that Urza was enraged with him. "Urza, what the hell?" Ichigo exclaimed, noticing that the magical sword was mere centimeters away from cutting into the ceiling wizard's shoulder. His words, however, didn't seem to register with the very person he had addressed. "You will dispel the wind barrier and you will do so without complaint?" Urza demanded, a dark shade covering her face as she glared at the dark mage. Kage, to his credit, managed not to say a word. He did, however, sweat bullets and shook slightly at the look the scarlet-haired woman was directing at him. Ichigo, from his perspective, was starting to see exactly why people were so afraid of this one woman. "Just do it, man, this chick's a real monster," Natsu said, still shaking from his previous thoughts that he was going to be brutally maimed by the red-headed knight. "Shut up, Natsu," Gray barked. "Am I understood?" Urza asked sternly, still holding her magical weapon within an inch of slicing into the Eisenwald wizard. Fine, I'll dispel it," Kage replied fearfully. Ichigo and the others shared an internal sigh of relief, mostly because of the fact that this meant they were virtually in the clear, or at least DMN near close to it. An instant later, and much to their dismay, that sense of relief vanished. Each watched as a hand pierced through Kage's body, sprouting forth from a magical seal located on his stomach. It was clearly not doing any visible damage, but it very likely did significant amounts thereof to the wizard's internal organs. The amount of pain had to be substantial, as evident by the loud cry that the raven-haired man gave out upon this occurring. Kage groaned before falling over, revealing the thickly built Eisenwald mage that had ran away upon Ichigo and Urza defeating his comrades so easily. "Kuraka, why?" Kage uttered before his eyes shut and his body finally hit the floor. "Kage!" Urza shouted, realizing that if this man died their chances of escaping effectively dropped to about zero. The green-haired wizard that had perpetrated the attack just stammered and released quiet, short gasps in rapid succession, almost as if he couldn't really grasp the gravity of what he had just done. Nevertheless, he was still rendered immobile, and that allowed him to learn just how set off he had made several different people. "You!" Ichigo growled out. Without giving it a second thought, the orange-haired teen grabbed the stout man's collar and pulled him out of the wall, which said wizard didn't even seem to register for a moment. Immediately thereafter, Ichigo slammed the man's body into the very same wall so hard that it left an imprint, and even despite the nature of the mage's magical powers, he appeared to be too shocked to negate the blow by phasing through the stone. Even if you're in a dark guild, that man is still your comrade. Does that mean nothing to you? Why would you try to kill someone who you should think of as a friend? Ichigo roared, glaring and scowling extremely heavily at the green-haired man. Kuraka ummed out, simply being too shocked to form a coherent sentence. "No answer." "Thought not, piece of trash." Ichigo scoffed, after which he simply dropped the man flat on his rear. Kuraka almost immediately retreated back into the stone wall from whence he came, but a certain pink-haired dragon slayer wasn't about to let the scum get away with taking down his comrade. "Oh no you don't." Natsu growled out, veins popping out on his forehead. His fists lit up a moment later, after which he absolutely and utterly destroyed the wall that was placed in front of them. Subsequently thereafter the body of the green-haired phase magic user slammed into the floor of the following room, landing with a loud boom. "Is that how you Dark Guild members treat each other?" Natsu exclaimed, shortly after which he punched Kuraka through the wall opposite of his current position. "Kage, can you hear me?" Urza questioned. "I think we're losing him, Urza," Gray stated, checking the body for signs of life. "We can't lose him. We need him to dispel the wind barrier," Urza shouted. "He's unconscious, it's no use," Gray replied. "We have to try," Urza said. The scarlet-haired mage then began to shake Kage's body, slamming his head into the floor repeatedly in the process. Gray watched her actions poly out with a sweat drop while Ichigo just released a tired sigh. "If you want him to wake up, don't keep banging his head against the floor." Also, I doubt he could even use magic in that condition. Ichigo stated evenly. He will if I force him to. Urza replied, still shaking the dark wizard's body. Did we miss something? Lucy wondered aloud as she and the blue-furred exceed entered via the large hole that Natsu had sent Kage through during their battle. Happy said confusedly. Some time later. I see, so we're basically stuck here? Lucy asked, eliciting a nod from several within the group. But we have to stop Aragorn from reaching the guild masters. Natsu exclaimed angrily. I know that, Natsu. Calm down. Urza chided, causing the pink-haired mage to pale. I think we all need to calm down. Is there anything any of you can think of that we can do to get out of this mess? Ichigo asked calmly. I don't know. The wind barrier is too powerful for any of us to bully through, and our one hope of dispelling it is currently unconscious. Urza replied, sounding slightly worried. Hang on, let me try something. Ichigo stated. The entirety of those present watched as the orange-haired teen pulled his sword off of his back and prepared to stab it directly into the wind barrier. This, in turn, confused many given that it wasn't all too likely that an ordinary sword was going to have a shot at breaking through, but even so it was worth a try. Ichigo stabbed his Zanpakuto directly into the flowing current of wind, actually managing to keep his sword steady if he used all of his strength to do so. No matter how hard he tried, however, he couldn't go in the direction of the current and create an opening for the others. The momentum and speed of the wind was simply too great for him to do such a thing with physical strength alone. With that known, he retracted his sword, a scowl once again present on his face. Damn it. Ichigo spat. Let me try. Natsu exclaimed. Immediately after he was about to run up and charge the wind barrier head-on, a lone hand placed on his shoulder stopped him dead in his tracks. He turned to see that the ownership of said hand belonged to Ichigo, who had a stern look on his features. If my sword doesn't break through that wind barrier, trust me when I say that your fists won't. Even if you try, you'll just end up being hurt and we need to save our strength. Ichigo said seriously. In any normal circumstance Natsu would have ignored the warning and charged in any way, however this was not a normal circumstance. Moreover, the tone Ichigo used was just too ominous, and something told him that those words rang true. But what else can we do? Natsu asked confusedly. The group collectively went silent, mostly due to the fact that they currently had nothing to offer. Charging into the barrier in the hopes of taking it down appeared to be pointless and foolish, and waiting for Kage to come to would likely be a waste of time due to the fact that even if he were to wake up it was very unlikely that he would be able to use his magic energy to dispel the barrier. If I really had to, I could try to use my Getsuga Tensho to break through the barrier, which would probably work, but even if it did the amount of spiritual energy I'd use would tear this station apart along with whatever in the city I would wind up hitting after it broke through, and that definitely wouldn't be an ideal outcome. Ichigo thought. However, the way that things were going he was beginning to think that they were fresh out of other options. Wait, Lucy, can't we just use your spirits? Natsu exclaimed, causing everyone else's ear to perk up as a result. Wah! Lucy uttered. Back at Everloose I was transported from one place to another through the spirit world. Natsu stated excitedly, believing that he had figured out a way to solve their dilemma. Yeah, but normal people would just suffocate to death in the celestial spirit world. Also it's against contract rules. I didn't mind when you did it before because it was Everloose key, not mine. Besides, I would have to have opened the gate from outside the wind barrier for that to even remotely work. Lucy replied, striking down that as an option. Lucy. I just remembered what I was trying to tell you on the way here. Happy exclaimed. What, you mean when you were calling me weird? Lucy asked. Here. Happy chirped, presenting a golden celestial spirit key to the blonde. How'd you get your hands on Virgo's key? Lucy exclaimed. Wait, who? Ichigo wondered aloud, his words matching the thoughts of both Urza and Gray. Oh yeah, that big gorilla-looking maid. Natsu recalled. Didn't anyone ever teach you not to steal? Lucy asked, punching the cat's mouth in a comical fashion. But I didn't steal it, Virgo asked me to give it to you. Happy stated, after which the blonde-haired wizard released him from her grip. We don't have time to waste on this kind of stuff. Gray scoffed. Apparently, her contract with Everlou ended as soon as he was arrested. Before we all left that day she came up to me and said that she wanted to sign a new contract with you, Lucy. Happy explained. Thanks for letting me know, but I'll deal with her later. In case you didn't notice, we need to find a way out of here. Lucy stated. But. Happy began. Shut up. Why can't you just meow like a normal cat? Lucy asked, a dark aura surrounding her body as she pinched the feline's delicate face. She can be pretty scary. Gray commented. Probably learned it from Urza. Natsu mused, cheerfully observing the blonde's interaction with his best friend. I'm sorry. I just thought that since Virgo can drill holes, maybe she could dig through the ground and get us to the other side of the barrier. Happy stated in a dejected manner, obviously not taking the fact that his attempt at helping his comrades went over so poorly. She can what? Ichigo, Urza, and Gray exclaimed in unison. Oh yeah. Natsu trailed off, tapping his chin at the recollection of the pink-haired spirit's abilities. That's right. Why didn't you say that before, you brilliant, adorable little cat? Lucy cooed in an upbeat tone. I was trying to, but someone was pinching my face. Happy replied. My deepest apologies, now can I please have the key? Lucy pleaded, bowing humbly before the blue-haired feline. Give me some fish and all is forgiven. Happy chirped, after which he relinquished the key. By the way, see if you do away with that contract crap for right now. We don't have much time when Aragorn has this much of a head start. Ichigo stated. I know, I was going to, but before I can even do that I have to summon her. Lucy replied. The blonde took the traditional stance she preferred to use when summoning a spirit for the first time, at which point she zoned out all other distractions and focused on the task of opening the celestial portal. I call upon thee, in the world of the celestial spirits. And now, I beckon you to my side at once, pass through the gate. Lucy incanted, flipping the key in the air before grabbing it with her hand. Open, gate of the maiden, Virgo. Lucy exclaimed. When the portal had opened and said spirit answered the call of the celestial wizard, the full form of the presumably ape-like creature was in full view. However, she was anything but how she had been previously described. Before the group stood a petite young-looking woman with pure blue eyes, peach-colored skin, and pink hair. She wore a maid's outfit, and for some reason sported a pair of shackles that were disconnected from one another other respective wrists. What can I do for you, mistress? Virgo questioned respectfully, bowing slightly to the blonde-haired mage. Who are you? Lucy uttered, seemingly incapable of saying anything else. What's up, Burger, man, you look great. You've lost some weight. Natsu commented in a friendly manner. My name's Virgo, I apologize for any trouble I might have caused. Virgo replied. Wait, this is the maid that you said looked like a big ape? Ichigo asked confusedly, gesturing a finger towards the pink-haired spirit. Yeah, and she didn't just lose weight, she's a completely different person. Lucy shouted. I'm a very loyal spirit who'll do anything to please her wizard. Therefore I take on any form I feel my wizard will find most appealing. Virgo explained with a small smile. I dunno, I kind of liked the other. You better. Natsu thought aloud. Oh, I can fix that. Virgo stated. An instant later, and much to the surprise and dismay of everyone else present, the celestial spirit took on the very same form she donned when working under Duke Everlou. Holy crap, she really did look like an ape. Ichigo thought. Don't listen to him. I'm your wizard and I like the other form better. Lucy shouted, prompting the spirit to obey and revert to her more petite visage. As you wish, mistress. Virgo replied. We're kind of short on time right now, so do you mind if we work out the details of our contract later? Lucy asked in a hopeful tone. Of course, whatever you'd like, mistress. Virgo replied, though a particular word she used had rubbed the blonde the wrong way. Do you really have to call me that? Lucy wondered aloud, sounding slightly annoyed. Oh. Would you prefer I call you Queen? Virgo asked. No. Lucy immediately answered. What about Princess? Virgo asked. Oh yeah, that'll work just fine. Lucy replied with a vain look about her features. Why does that not surprise me? Ichigo wondered aloud, getting a quiet chuckle from both Gray and Natsu. Can you please just drill a hole to the other side? We desperately need to get out of here as soon as possible. Urza said, getting back on track. As you wish. Virgo sated. An instant later the pink-haired woman bowed slightly before she activated her magical abilities. A magic seal appeared underneath her feet, after which she went to work, quite literally. Within seconds a large hole appeared, giving everyone else the clear message that they had their ticket out. Let's get out of this joint. Gray said as he walked towards the hole. Hang on. Natsu trailed off, drawing all eyes to him. Everyone turned to see the Dragon Slayer with the arm of their technical enemy hoisted across his shoulders and the body being supported as a result. It was very clear what the wizard's intent was, and yet still it was necessary to make sure. What do you think you're doing, Natsu? Gray asked evenly. I don't really like him, but I'd feel guilty for him if we just left him here to die. Natsu stated. Well then I don't see a problem. Ichigo trailed off, throwing his own human body over his shoulders before he walked up to the Dragon Slayer's side. Very well. Urza permitted. Outside Ashibana Station, several minutes later. Looks like we made it out. Gray mused. It was more along the lines of stating the obvious given that every member of the group was currently looking back as the wind barrier continued to rage on the outskirts of the building they had just exited. Hey, where did Natsu go? Ichigo asked, shifting his head and finding not a trace of Fairy Tail's resident Dragon Slayer. I don't see Happy either. Lucy commented. That probably just means that Natsu went after Aragorn. Happy is capable of flying at extremely high speeds, so if ever there was a chance to catch up to Aragorn, that'd be the one. Urza explained. It's no use, he'll never be able to catch up to Aragorn, and neither will any of you. We can't be stopped now, we've won. Kage stated. The members of the group scowled down at the beaten and battered form of the Eisenwald wizard, shortly after which Ichigo set down his body and looked back to his teammates with a serious expression etched on his face. Though they were all confused by this, clearly he was about to say something and so no one bothered to voice said emotion. If Natsu went after Aragorn, then I'll go after him as fast as I can. I need one of you to put my human body in the magic mobile and head to Clover. With any luck, you'll run into us on the way there. Ichigo said before he began to walk off. Wait, Ichigo, how are you going to catch up? I know you're fast, but still. Lucy said confusedly. What she says is true. It is best if you simply come with us on the magic mobile. Urza added. Trust me, I can catch up. Ichigo stated, releasing a slight chuckle. Before anyone could raise a question as to how or why the teen know this, Ichigo vanished in a blur of light. It was almost as if he had just disappeared without a trace. What? Gray muttered, looking at the spot where the substitute had been standing with slightly widened eyes. Did he just vanish? Lucy questioned, looking to the scarlet-haired knight for an answer. Yes. I believe he did. Urza replied. Moreover, she couldn't even sense his presence. It was as if he had traveled so far out of immediate sensory range that his movements couldn't even be detected. That was actually impressive, as the Queen of the Fairies had never seen anything like it in all her years as a wizard. Anyway, we should probably get going. Something tells me when we head to Clover we'll find Natsu and Ichigo on the way. Gray stated, prompting everyone else present to nod in understanding. Railway towards Clover, with Aragorn. Eisenwald's ace currently flew towards the Guild Masters' Conference without a care in the world. Actually, that wasn't true in that he cared a good bit about ending their lives, but at the same time he wasn't pressured in the slightest. His plan had, thus far, gone off without a single hitch. And those fairy tale flies are still trapped within my wind barrier. I have to say though that I regret not teaching the Queen of the Fairies and that orange-haired brat a lesson. Aragorn thought. At the same time, killing the guild masters came first, he supposed. The silver-haired man abruptly stopped in his path, his eyes widening slightly as he sensed something incoming, and it was simply moving too fast to ignore. With a curious expression, he turned around, looking off into the distance to see what on earth was going on. What the hell is that? Aragorn wondered. Off in the distance he saw an object that moved so quickly it was shining, but that was only for a brief moment. A second or two later it became closer, at which point he saw exactly what it was, and he simply couldn't believe his eyes. We've got you now. Didn't know cats could fly at Mach speeds, did ya? Natsu shouted as he flew towards the wind magic user, his own hands grabbing Happy's legs. What? Aragorn uttered in a tone of disbelief. The flaming foot of the dragon slayer connected with his body shortly thereafter, causing an explosion to engulf Aragorn's form and a significant amount of smoke to cover his fall towards the train tracks. Both Natsu and his opponent landed on their feet, the dragon slayer doing so with his back facing the wind magic user. He caught Happy in his hands a moment later, taking note that the Exceed looked incredibly tired and worn out. You alright, little buddy? Natsu asked, a touch of concern making its way into his voice. I'm fine, but, so tired. I can't fly. Happy whispered weakly. Don't worry about it. I think I can handle it from here. Natsu replied, setting the blue-haired feline on the grounds below. You're one of those pesky fairy tale flies. I take it you're here to stop me? Aragorn mused, after which his opponent turned to face him with a stern glare etched on his features. You got that right, you dress wearin' windbag. I'm kickin' your butt for fairy tale. Natsu exclaimed. Heh, funny. Get out of my way, kid, or else. Aragorn said warningly, bringing up a hand and gesturing an open palm towards the dragon slayer. A magical seal appeared before the extended open palm, after which a powerful gust of wind poured forth. It washed over the pink-haired mage like an unstoppable tide, little by little moving his feet backward whether he wanted them to or not. Is that all you got? Natsu taunted, immediately after which the wind picked up to such a speed that it caused a slight explosion where he stood. From the smoke and dust that resulted from Aragorn's attack, the dragon slayer shot into the air, fire propelling his movements and flames once again covering his fists. He shot back down towards Aragorn with all the fury of an actual dragon, power just written within his eyes. The Reaper dodged the attack, leaping backwards and evading any significant damage. He did, however, get a front row seat to the pink-haired mage smashing his previous position into a million tiny pieces. I ain't lettin' you off that easy. Natsu exclaimed, lunging towards the silver-haired man without delay. Aragorn brought up his scythe, effectively blocking the fire-reinforced attack and once again getting out of the current engagement without any injury. When the dragon slayer proved to be done with his assault, the Reaper then floated back into the air, gazing down at his opponent in an observational manner. Impossible, he uses his flames to jump and to strike. I underestimated his power, this might actually be a challenge. Aragorn thought, releasing a slight chuckle to himself. Hey, what are you doing up there? Come down here and fight me like a man. Natsu demanded. Don't get too cocky, fly. Aragorn shouted, extending his hand and preparing to cast a powerful attack. What the hell? Natsu wondered, feeling a large amount of magical energy building from underneath his feet. Stormbringer. Aragorn exclaimed, subsequently after which a large tornado-like burst of wind erupted from underneath his opponent. Natsu was spun around the vortex of wind as if he truly weighed nothing at all. At the same time he was helpless to do anything given that he couldn't even regain his footing to the point that he could exit the torrent of high-velocity air. Natsu! Happy uttered upon seeing his friend in trouble. The blue-haired cat tried with all his might to call forth his wings once again, but to no avail. He was simply too drained to do anything whatsoever, and, as a result, all he could do was watch. It's no use. I don't have enough magic energy. Happy thought aloud. Natsu screamed as he fell from the apex of the tornado, skyrocketing to the bottom of the canyon. Before he passed the ground level of the railway, a hand quickly grabbed his wrist, stopping his fall and effectively stabilizing his current trajectory. The Dragon Slayer looked up to see Ichigo standing on the side of the train tracks with his hand firmly gripping his wrist. "I've got you, now get your butt back up here so we can end this," Ichigo said with a smirk. Natsu responded in kind, smirking in a manner similar to his friend before he was pulled up and once again felt the sensation of solid ground being located beneath his feet. If anything, the current situation only appealed to him because at least now he got to see more of what Ichigo could do. It still didn't make sense to him that the orange-haired teen managed to get here so fast. However, given that Ichigo saved him the trouble of wasting magical energy to bail himself out of the mess he had gotten himself into, he supposed it didn't matter at the moment. "What's this, another fly comes to be swatted down?" Aragorn sneered from the air. "You know something, Aragorn, you really pss me off," Ichigo stated, turning around and unsheathing his sword. "Oh, and what are you going to do about it, fairy tale FL?" Aragorn began. He stopped his sentence the moment the form of the orange-haired teen appeared directly in front of him with his sword ped back and prepared to cut him across his body. At the rate the sword was moving coupled with how quickly its wielder had appeared before him, there was quite literally nothing he could do but back up as quickly as he was able and hope the blade didn't leave too deep a wound. "I didn't even see him move," Aragorn thought, sweating slightly in the build-up to the sword's impact with his flesh. The Eisenwald's ace's blood poured forth as the large cleaver-like Zanpakuto cut across his body, leaving a fresh wound and simultaneously forcing the wind magic user to shoot backwards and fall into the ground in an attempt to gather himself. However, no sooner than he landed did the Dragon Slayer mount another attack in succession to his comrade's first. The flaming fist connected directly with Aragorn's cheek, catching him completely off guard, which subsequently sent the silver-haired man reeling across the train tracks yet again. "That's what you get for messin' with fairy tale," Natsu stated proudly. "Nice hit," Ichigo complimented as he landed on the ground. "Thanks for the opening to land it," Natsu replied, smirking heavily at the orange-haired teen. "These insects dare to wound me?" Aragorn thought angrily as he picked himself off of the ground. The Reaper floated off into the air once again, staring down at the two opponents and glaring heavily at them. Despite the fact that they currently had the upper hand, there was still a trick or two that he had yet to play. "Hey, how did you move that fast back there?" Natsu asked, turning to the substitute with a confused look etched on his face. "What are you referring to?" Ichigo asked. "You know what I mean, when you vanished and appeared right in front of the worn-out windbag," Natsu clarified. "I'll tell you later. For now we should finish this fight before Urza and the others get here," Ichigo stated. "Right," Natsu replied, after which they turned their collective vision towards the silver-haired wizard once again. "Heh, you flies are resilient, I'll give you that. However, now I think it's time I got serious," Aragorn began. The Eiswald mage brought forth his scythe and placed it in front of his body, after which he tapped the and began to spin it rapidly in circles. As it continued its motion, a large amount of magic energy manifested as wind began to gather, pulling and throwing around rocks and dust as it continued to rage. "Wind mail!" Aragorn exclaimed. A large amount of wind surrounded his body, acting like a barrier and continuously raging on at high speeds. From first glance, it didn't look to be all that strong, but only time would tell, of course. That barrier would have to be pretty powerful for him to be that cocky again. Ichigo thought. This is one of my most powerful spells. All of your attacks are now useless against me. Aragorn stated cockily from within the confines of his wind mail. The Dark Wizard even went so far as to come back onto the ground, allowing both Ichigo and Natsu the chance to charge at him head-on. It was either a show of arrogance, or the barrier was really just that strong. We'll see about that. Natsu scoffed. His fists lit up like a blazing inferno a moment later, after which he charged his opponent with everything he had, not giving an inch. Unfortunately, just as his punches were about to connect with the barrier, the flames vanished, leaving the Dragon Slayer powerless and incapable of doing any significant damage. Get out of there, Natsu! Ichigo exclaimed worriedly. The pink-haired wizard had heard the warning, but he was unable to respond to it. Without even a slight warning, Aragorn sent a powerful blast of wind directly at Natsu, knocking him back far across the railway. Ichigo caught the Dragon Slayer and stabilized his would-be crash landing, after which he opted to use Flash Step in order to get the jump on the silver-haired man just as he had done before. He appeared directly behind the Dark Wizard and brought Zangetsu across the wind barrier and presumably Aragorn's body. When the sword did nothing more than go along with the current of the wind barrier, Ichigo scowled, knowing full well that the barrier, though it was capable of being lightly penetrated, was far too thick to completely cut through. Well, that wasn't entirely true, but if Ichigo used the necessary force to cut through the barrier, he would end up slicing Aragorn into two separate pieces, which he would like to avoid if at all possible. Nice try! Aragorn shouted, turning around and making an attempt to send the orange-haired teen flying off just as he had previously done with the Dragon Slayer. However, the moment that he had turned and launched his attack was the very same moment he realized that the man was no longer behind him. With a scowl marking his face from beneath the wind barrier, Aragorn turned to face his opponents once more. Though you are still in one piece, it matters not. It is as I thought, the both of you cannot break through my wind barrier, and your fire magic is completely useless against me. Aragorn exclaimed. He isn't wrong, those flames will be snuffed out if Natsu comes in too close just by the direction of the wind, but is that really all there is to it? Ichigo wondered, thinking of a way he could get past the incredibly annoying magical spell. He could always just use Getsuga Tensho, but that would be more than overkill, and there was also a high possibility that Aragorn would be mortally wounded. If he wanted to accomplish that, then just slicing him in two would be infinitely easier. On top of that, and probably the greater of the two concerns involving the use of Getsuga Tensho, was that an attack like that would completely blow away the railway, and doing so would definitely attract the wrong kind of attention towards him. Plus, if I do end up blowing the train tracks away, I'm pretty sure the old man would throw a fit. Ichigo thought. The orange-haired teen continued to think on other possible avenues to defeat his and Natsu's collective opponent. However, none of them seemed very feasible unless the wind barrier was taken down. If that were to suddenly disappear, then they would easily be able to win. Wait, that's it. Ichigo thought. In a moment of realization, his eyes widened and he turned to Natsu, completely understanding a very specific way they could defeat the Reaper and save the guild masters. Natsu, crank up your flames as high as you can. Ichigo shouted urgently. The pink-haired wizard looked slightly confused at the odd request for a moment, but an instant later his expression twisted into a knowing smirk. He understood perfectly well where this was going, and if their hunch was correct, it would give them the victory. You got it! Natsu exclaimed, after which his body erupted in a torrent of fire and flames. A raging inferno extended into the sky, becoming a practical pillar of destruction as the Dragon Slayer roared on and on from within the epicenter. The heat quickly grew to an outrageous level of intensity, at which point the wind from Aragorn's barrier did precisely what was expected. Impossible, my wind mail it's fading. Aragorn thought in a slight panic. With the flames heating the air, it's creating a high-pressure area, which is also drawing in the wind from Aragorn's spell. Way to go, Natsu! Happy cheered. His fire magic is so strong, how can he possibly be this powerful? Aragorn thought, sweating as his protective barrier and practical trump card was so easily cast aside. He didn't even have time to come up with an effective countermeasure as within the next moment Ichigo appeared out of thin air directly in front of him, after which he sent his Zanpakuto slashing down the right side of Aragorn's body without a second thought. The silver-haired man fell backwards, blood pouring from his wound and his eyes closing, likely due to the intense pain he currently felt. Without a doubt, however, he was out cold, and with that the victory went to Fairy Tail. You should have just given up when I offered. Maybe then we wouldn't have had to beat the crap out of you. Ichigo stated, though he knew the Eisenwald ace couldn't hear him. Is he gonna live? Natsu asked evenly as he waked up to observe the defeated form of his opponent. Yeah, I didn't cut him too deep. He'll live, but he's down for the count. Ichigo replied. Alright, we won. Natsu stated contentedly, dancing around in circles in a childish manner. Yeah, it looks like we did. Ichigo mused, releasing a slight chuckle upon staring back at the teen he had come to see as a good friend in such a short period of time. He sheathed Zangetsu once again, after which he kneeled down and took the lullaby flute from Aragorn's possession. Doing so finally brought this battle to a close, and it also marked the defeat of Eisenwald, or so he thought. Good job by the way. You fought really well. Ichigo complimented, smiling at the pin-haired mage. Heh, you were really good yourself. We make a pretty good team, just like I thought we would. Natsu said with a wide grin. I guess so. Ichigo replied, releasing an inward chuckle at the words of the Dragon Slayer. Hey look, it's everyone else. Natsu shouted happily, pointing his index finger towards an approaching magic mobile. The vehicle came to an abrupt halt, skidding slightly across the rock that marked the railway, but successfully not running anyone over nonetheless. A moment later its occupants left the inside, after which the remaining members of their group were shown to wear proud smiles at the scene that greeted them. At the moment Urza was being supported by Lucy, likely due to the fact that her magical energy was still so drained. Opposite of those two, Gray walked on carrying Ichigo's body, which was a good thing given that the substitute had thought they had potentially forgotten it. Gray, why don't you have clothes anymore? Ichigo asked tiredly, at this point just accepting the fact that the raven-haired ice wizard had a habit of losing them. What are you? Gray began, looking down and instantly noticing that his clothes were missing. He then released a tired groan, but it had happened several times today thus far so there was really no use complaining about it. Never mind. Ichigo sighed out. Looks like you two really did get the job done after all. Urza mused, smiling slightly at the duo. Yup, here's our souvenir. Ichigo said jokingly, tossing the skull-headed flute towards the redhead in a nonchalant manner. Excellent, with this we have succeeded in saving Clover and the guild masters. Urza said contentedly. I'm surprised since Natsu was the first one to fight him. I was sure he'd screw it up. Gray scoffed. Hey, we beat him didn't we? Natsu exclaimed. Yeah, but I was worried for a second there. Happy muttered. What, you guys didn't think I could take down Aragorn? Natsu asked as if the very notion insulted him. You were doing pretty well, but if Ichigo didn't show up when he did you were looking at a one-way ticket to the bottom of the canyon. Happy countered. I had it under control. Natsu stated defensively, though the words of the blue-haired cat seemed to cause the others to remember something. Speaking of which, how exactly did you catch up to Natsu so quickly? Lucy asked curiously. Yes, I would like to know as well. You simply vanished before our eyes and I couldn't sense your presence after you had. Urza added. Are you guys talking about that vanishing trick? It's really awesome. Natsu said excitedly. Vanishing trick? You mean? Ichigo began. A moment later a light buzz sounded off, after which his body, for a brief period of time, vanished from sight. He appeared a moment later directly behind Natsu, placing a hand on the Dragon Slayer's shoulders and effectively startling him and simultaneously impressing the group given that none of them had seen or predicted where he had moved. "Gah!" Natsu yelped, almost instantly jumping forward and turning around to see what had just touched his shoulder. "Nice one." Gray complimented sarcastically, referring to the pink-haired wizard's evident distress. "Why'd you have to do that, man?" Natsu exclaimed, clenching his heart as it was beating rather quickly. For a split second he thought Aragorn had come to and was about to cut into his back, which wasn't exactly a pleasant thought. "Sorry, but you wanted to see it again, right?" Ichigo reasoned. "What exactly is that technique? Are you teleporting or manipulating space, perhaps time?" Urza guessed, eliciting a shake of the head from the orange-haired teen. "No, not really. It's a technique called Flash Step that allows me to travel great distances by using my spiritual energy to forward my movements. When I do this, it allows me to move much faster than I would be able to at any natural speeds." Ichigo replied. "Can other people where you're from do that too?" Natsu asked from his position of sitting on the ground, having still not gotten up. "Yeah, it's pretty common, but the speed of the Flash Step varies from person to person. Mine is pretty quick, but at the same time even I'm easily outclassed by a few other people in that regard." Ichigo explained. The substitute then looked towards his body, which Gray picked up on and then held up so as to allow Ichigo a free passageway back into himself, technically. A moment later the two separate forms became one, and once again the orange-haired teen opened his eyes and felt the release of being able to move freely in his own skin. "By the way, Natsu, you look like an idiot wearing that scarf while you're half naked." Gray commented upon relinquishing Ichigo's body. "You're one to talk. Hey, Lucy, give me your clothes," Natsu requested. "In your dreams," Lucy growled. "What the hell's the matter with you? You can't just say things like that, it makes you seem like a pervert," Ichigo chided, lightly smacking the Dragon Slayer on the back of his head. "Ouch, what was that for?" Natsu asked, rubbing his head slightly. "Were you even listening?" Ichigo exclaimed, though he knew the answer. The remaining members of the group chuckled at the display, after which the full weight of the situation finally reached them. Everything was over, in actuality, since the guild masters were safe and Eisenwald was defeated. "Anyway, well done you two," Urza complimented. Before a reply could be made, the abrupt sound of an engine revving up came from down the railway. Each turned to see the magic mobile charging forward, with a very familiar back-haired dark wizard sitting in the driver's seat and a series of shadowy limbs extending all around. "Two slow fairy tail flies," Kage exclaimed, driving past the group of enemy wizards and heading straight down the tracks towards Clover. As he passed, however, he didn't do so empty-handed. The shadowy tendrils grabbed two very specific items from the clutches of the Fairy Tail Guild members. One was rather obvious, the death flute known as Lullaby, but the other was the wooden skull badge that Ichigo had used to access his powers. What the hell? Ichigo wondered, noticing the absence of the combat past the second after it occurred. "We have to go after him," Urza exclaimed. With a begrudging nod, each of the members began to run after the Rouge Wizard without delay. The one positive of the situation was that Kage didn't have all too much magical energy, at least in all likelihood. Due to this, even if Clover was just up ahead, he likely wouldn't be able to get there all that quicker than they would be able to. "I just hope we make it there in time," Ichigo thought. Clover, forests outside the Guild Masters' Conference, some time later. The raven-haired Eiswald wizard stood in place atop a peak overlooking the Guild Masters' Conference. He had been forced to abandon the Magi Mobile some time ago, and the sun had set around that very same time, but nevertheless he had made it with time to spare. Without a shadow of a doubt the wizard masters were present within that building, and his current location afforded him with a simply perfect position. "From up here, Lullaby's magic will surely kill them, our time is here," Kage thought victoriously, tightening his grip on the demonic flute. A random noise from a nearby bush broke the dark wizard out of his thoughts, and incidentally startled him given that no one should actually be this far away from Clover and at this specific location. The only ones who were decent candidates to fill that slot were the fairy tale wizards that had followed him, but at the same time they shouldn't have been here so soon. He walked over to carefully examine the situation, after which he released an inward sigh of relief. It was just some random old man perversely enjoying a copy of what appeared to be Sorcerer's Weekly, and the previous week's edition no less. Oh wow, now that's really something. Makarov thought aloud, releasing a perverse giggle after he did so. Seeing this, however, gave the raven-haired mage an idea. Despite this man's appearance, he was definitely one of the guild masters, and that meant he was powerful. All the same, this opportunity presented a marvelous opening to test Lullaby's power firsthand. "Excuse me, sir." Kage called out, startling the elderly mage as he did so. It's not what it looks like," Makarov exclaimed, hiding the magazine behind his back as he spoke. The orange-clad man stopped his brief instance of panic upon getting a good look at the mere boy that had startled him so randomly. He appeared rather injured, bandages covering his body and his clothing torn. At the moment there wasn't even a shirt to cover his back. "You've been hurt badly, boy. You shouldn't be wandering around the woods in your condition," Makarov stated. "Yes sir, it's just that I was curious about something. I wanted to know if you'd care to hear a song. You see they wouldn't let me play it in the hospital, and I really would like for someone to hear me play." Kage replied in a friendly voice, smiling down at the rather short man. "That's one creepy flute you got there," Makarov commented warily. "I know, but it has a beautiful sound," Kage reassured, chuckling slightly as he spoke. Well I should be going, but I guess one song couldn't hurt," Makarov mused, deciding that a few minutes wouldn't truly prevent Natsu's group from destroying a city. "Oh thank you. Now, be sure to pay close attention," Kage stated, eliciting a nod from the elderly wizard. He brought the flute up to his mouth, realizing that this was it, the final moments before his triumph. It was fitting that the master of the fairy tale guild would be the first victim after all they did to him and his own guild, if not ironic. However, he paused, not bringing his lips to connect with the wood and not breathing into it so as to sound off the melody of death. Kage knew he should relish the opportunity, and yet his mind simply prevented him from acting. All the words, the fact that the fairy tale wizards had saved him, even the words of his comrades, popped into his head. The words of the annoying dragon slayer, of the orange-haired teen with the large sword, of the blonde celestial mage, everything they had ever said to him or in front of him contradicted what he thought to be true. Aragorn and the others would essentially denounce the legitimacy of joining a legal guild, in fact they despised the notion. They even went so far as to scoff at the mere implication. If he too was of that opinion, then this should have been easy, but the fact of the matter was that it was far from it. Why can't I bring myself to do it? It would be so easy, but what the things that they all said, were we wrong, am I wrong in doing this? Kage wondered, not moving a muscle and standing in silence. Forests off to the side. "There he is, he's with the master," Urza exclaimed. She and the others had come up towards the town and found the magic mobile off in the distance, a clear indicator that Kage was, in fact, somewhere close by. Now they had the dark wizard in their sights, however when they began to run forward someone stopped them. "Shoo, you're gonna miss the good part," Bob stated, bringing a finger over his mouth to further illustrate his request for silence. Most members of the group froze up at the sight of the effeminate bald man who appeared to be cross-dressing at the moment. His appearance was just disturbing, but he seemed pleasant enough, perhaps too pleasant towards some. Now aren't you boys just a bunch of cuties?" Bob cooed. At this, Ichigo's expression turned into one of absolute terror. Natsu and Gray were much the same, however they had the added benefit of being able to move behind Ichigo just in case they needed a human shield. "DMN you're creepy," Ichigo muttered, which coming from him truly did mean something. "Who's that guy?" Lucy asked confusedly. That's Master Bob. Urza replied, sweat dropping as the bald-headed man began to dance very strangely around Ichigo, and by extension the two mages who still hid behind him. The strange man stopped a moment later, after which he relented and turned instead towards Urza. "Oh, Urza honey, you've really filled out," Bob commented. "You're telling me that Weirdo's the master of the Blue Pegasus Guild?" Lucy asked quietly, though her tone was one of disbelief. "Better question, why the hell aren't you stopping Kage? You guys seem to know what he's doing," Ichigo said. "What do you mean by, you guys?" Natsu asked confusedly, momentarily putting aside the severe feelings of distress he was currently experiencing due to a certain quirky guild master. "Hee, this one's observant, I like that." Goldmine chuckled as he walked up to the group from within the woods. "Master Goldmine? You're here as well?" Urza asked confusedly. "Yeah, now keep quiet. We're about to get to the good part," Goldmine replied. In the presence of two guild masters telling them not to do anything, the members of the Fairy Tale Guild decided to take the order and remain quiet. Why they were asked to, they didn't know, but nevertheless they clearly knew what they were doing. They continued to watch as Kage didn't do a thing, which actually surprised them given that he was so close to completing the mission of his guild. Despite this, the man was currently hesitating. Once this was evident, little by little, the remaining onlookers began to grasp what the guild masters were aiming at. "Nothing's going to change," Makarov abruptly said, surprising raven-haired wizard with his words. What?" Kage muttered, taking note that the elderly wizard had turned his heel and allowed his back to face him. "You cannot change the fact that those who are weak will remain weak, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, we humans are weak creatures by nature. Our insecurities are the reason that guilds even exist, and they're why we have friends." Makarov continued, turning to face the dark wizard once more. "When we're surrounded by allies it's easy to stay positive about the future. Think of it this way, if we're clumsy we may stumble and bump into things, but as long as we have faith in our future we continue marching forward, our inner strength emerges on its own. But we have to choose that path and pledge to live our lives to the fullest. Don't let that silly flu get in the way." Makarov finished. Somewhat to the surprise of everyone present, but most certainly to their relief and joy, the wooden death flute fell from Kage's hands and the dark wizard fell to his hands and knees in front of Makarov, a defeated expression on his face but a burden clearly lifted from his shoulders. "Well done, old man," Ichigo thought with a smirk. He was starting to see exactly why the elderly wizard so respected and revered within the Fairy Tale Guild. "I surrender," Kage uttered. "Way to go, master," Natsu exclaimed as he and the others ran towards the elderly mage. How did you kids get all the way here to Clover?" Makarov asked confusedly. "It's a long story," Ichigo replied. "Does it end with a city being blown up?" Makarov asked with a raised brow. "Nope," Natsu replied. "Then fantastic," Makarov stated, jumping into the air in a victorious manner. "Master," Urza began, grabbing the elderly mage and slamming his body into her armor. It was likely a gesture of mild affection, but it seemed to give the guild master a good bump on the head. "I was so moved by your words I was almost brought to tears," Urza continued. "Well, that's just Gramps for ya, way to talk your way out of another one," Gray commented. He. A demonic laughter sounded off. Everyone's eyes widened slightly upon that voice registering within their ears. They knew perfectly well that it belonged to no one present, which meant that it was definitely going to be something unexpected. That was ironic given that fact that this was not just the first, but the second time this ordeal was presumably over. "I've grown tired of you wizards and your antics," the voice continued. An incredibly large magical seal appeared in the skies overlooking the conference hall. A moment later the death flute known as Lullaby floated towards the nexus of energy, its demonic voice evidently speaking as it did so. "I shall devour you myself." the voice proclaimed. Shortly thereafter a flash of light erupted and the magical seal vanished, after which the flute was no longer present, but in its place was definitely something more terrifying. A large wooden monstrous-looking creature with 3 eyes that shined with purple light, 2 arms, and a pair of legs now made itself evident. The creature also possessed small cutouts made themselves present all throughout the body. "I shall feast upon your souls," Lullaby exclaimed. "It's so huge," Lucy shouted in terror. "Way to state the obvious," Happy said nervously. "What is that thing?" Aragorn never said anything about a monster, Kage said as he gazed upon the demonic creature before them. "We're in a pickle," Bob thought aloud. "It must be a demon from the Book of Zirith." Goldmine reasoned. "Why did the flute turn into a monster?" Lucy questioned. "That's its true form. It's forbidden black magic called living magic, Zirith's specialty," Goldmine explained. "Who's Zirith? Wasn't he some wizard that died a long time ago?" Gray thought aloud. "He's the most evil wizard that ever lived. He was very powerful in his day, but in my wildest dreams I never thought his dark legacy would pop back up again," Bob replied. "Now then, which of your delectable souls shall I devour first?" Lullaby wondered aloud. "Do you think souls are tasty?" Natsu asked, turning to the raven-haired ice mage for an answer. "How should I know?" Gray shot back. "My guess is no, and for the record you're not eating anyone's soul today," Ichigo stated, glaring confrontationally at the large demonic being as he spoke. "Ha ha ha ha, oh. Perhaps you shall be the first I devour," Lullaby mused. "Not happening. Kage, give me the DMN badge already," Ichigo requested. The dark wizard gasped slightly given that he had previously been petrified with fear, but an instant later he reached into his pocket and tossed the wooden object towards its owner. Upon grabbing it, the substitute ejected from his body, allowing Lucy to catch it given that she figured fighting a giant monster in his place would be less than preferable. "What kind of magic is that?" Bob and Goldmine wondered simultaneously. My, you are an interesting one. Your soul is brimming with power. Oh yes, I shall most certainly devour you first," Lullaby stated, practically gushing at the spiritual energy that the orange-haired teen currently outputted. "Natsu, Gray, Urza, we should take this thing down quickly before it destroys too much," Ichigo said. "Hold on, I am the team's leader and as such I will give the orders," Urza stated firmly. "Knock yourself out," Ichigo replied, knowing full well that arguing at a time like this was pointless. "Natsu, Gray, Ichigo, give this everything you've got," Urza shouted. Each of whom she had addressed firmly nodded and an instant later the 4 ran off in unison, leaping upwardly towards the massive creature without a moment's hesitation. Ichigo unsheathed his sword, Natsu brought his fire to cover his fists, Urza prepared to don her armor, and Gray prepared to shoot the creature full of ice. "Requip!" Urza exclaimed. She opted to summon her Heaven's Will armor as she continued to near the creature, after which she began slashing directly through the midsection of the massive creature and effectively giving a convenient opening to her comrades as it tried to collect itself. "Ice make lance!" Gray exclaimed from the ground, firing off a slew of ice lances directly at the body of the massive demon. It wailed in pain as the attack pierced its skin, even recoiling slightly due to the fact that the magical ice had hit it from its side. "Fire Dragon's Iron Fist!" Natsu shouted, slamming his fist into the demon's neck and subsequently punching a hole through it. "Insolent fools!" Lullaby exclaimed, making to swat the dragon slayer. Its aim was offset a moment later courtesy of the 2 swordsmen that had started to chop and slash at random parts of its body, flying around or leaping and attacking it without relent. "Enough of this!" Lullaby shouted, stomping its foot on the ground so as to create enough of a shockwave to rid itself of its attackers for a brief moment. Ichigo was forced to use Flash Step to appear on the ground, Natsu was forced to jump off the demon's body, and Urza was forced to fly backwards lest they each be hit by the force of the defensive move. However, it was beyond the shadow of a doubt that they currently had the upper hand. The demon currently had holes covering its body, and despite its size the wounds were noticeable. What's more was the fact that the wounds inflicted by the orange-haired teen specifically burned, even after the impact. It was as if it cut into the very fabric of its magic, which should have been impossible. "That blade of yours, who are you, child? What magic do you use that allows your sword to burn my skin at the touch?" Lullaby asked. "My name's Ichigo Kurosaki, and I don't have time to explain something like that to a demon that's about to meet its end." Ichigo replied. "Ha! It is not I, but you who will meet his end here today. Behold my melody of death!" Lullaby exclaimed. It took a large breath of fresh air, after which it gathered magical energy within its throat and prepared to release. If the song was capable of getting gout, then no one was safe. Not the guild masters and not the fairy tale guild members. When it finally did perform the spell, however, nothing happened. Just a quiet little squeak sounded off from within its throat, which clearly surprised the large demon a great deal. "What happened?" Lucy exclaimed. "I don't understand, why can't I play my melody of death?" Lullaby shouted confusedly. "They must have poked so many holes in it with their attacks that it can't play its music." Kage reasoned. "Talk about anticlimactic," Lucy commented. "Flutes are pretty lame to being with." Happy added. "You dare to mock me?" Lullaby roared. A moment later it shot a powerful energy projectile directly at the group that still sat atop the hillside. They, in turn, began to panic as the energy came closer and closer to hitting its target. Lucy, Urza, Natsu, and Gray exclaimed in unison. Not one to allow his comrades to be injured if he could help it, Ichigo appeared directly in front of the energy projectile and stopped its path with his Zanpakuto. At first the attack managed to push him back, causing his feet to skid across the rocky terrain and displace a good bit of the ground. Nevertheless it seemed he was capable of blocking something so powerful with just his basic sword. To be able to block such an attack. Urza thought, knowing full well that there were only a select few of her armors that could accomplish such a thing. A moment later the attack was proven not only to have been blocked, but outright deflected. Once he had regained his footing, Ichigo slashed his Zanpakuto forward with as much force as he could, effectively dispelling Lullaby's attack and rendering a large majority of those present speechless at the very sight. "Impossible! No one should be able to block my attack!" Lullaby shouted defiantly. "You know what? I've had just about enough of hearing your voice. I think it's time to shut you up once and for all," Ichigo stated. The large demonic creature made to reply, but its voice caught in its throat at the feel of what happened next. Ichigo extended his sword horizontally forward, supporting his right arm with his left and gathering a large amount of spiritual energy. His power surged into the sky and around his body, taking the form of a raging blue pillar of raw energy that shot up as far as the eye could see. Most began sweat slightly at the feel of what each had never felt before in their existence. So much energy and yet it didn't feel like magic, not at this concentration at least. What kind of power is this? Urza wondered, watching as the energy continued to build up. "Getsuga," Ichigo began, bringing his sword back. Lullaby watched as the sword was ped back, but the raw power that it sensed seemed to paralyze it. For some reason it simply couldn't move. However, even if it could, it likely wouldn't have been able to dodge the attack given how massive it soon showed itself to be. "Tensho!" Ichigo shouted. A colossal burst of blue energy poured forth from the blade as it was swung forwards, consuming absolutely everything in its path. The winds burst in all directions at high speeds, and even the guild masters themselves could only look at the attack with a sense of awe. The light blue glow of the attack completely eclipsed the form of Lullaby, and all that could be heard were its screams of torment before all of a sudden it just stopped making sound altogether. When the energy had dissipated, the giant monster was completely gone. The only thing that remained was the flute from whence it came. However, as that very same flute began to fall towards the ground, it began to turn into dust, slowly evaporating until absolutely nothing remained. For a moment no one said a thing, all they could do was stare at where the massive creature previously stood, and where the attack courtesy of the orange-haired teen has just recently eclipsed. His attack destroyed the flute. But that shouldn't have happened. No magic in the world has the power to undo Zeref's curse, but perhaps that isn't it. Makarov thought, knowing full well that Ichigo